Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is your boy, Jay Mace, and welcome to a very special edition of Beyond the Album Cover, where we have interviews with people within the music industry, and we give them their flowers while they're here so that they can smell them and have them be celebrated. Right now, with me all the way from Australia, I have my man, KG, from the UK pop R&B group MN8, and he rarely gives interviews, so you guys definitely be appreciative of him taking the time out of his schedule. I mean, he is literally with me online right now in Australia. KG, how you doing? Thank you for taking the time out to be on Beyond the Album Cover, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jarrell. Hey, Jarrell. Really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor. It's an honor.
Oh man, that pleasure is all mine, because like we were talking about before we started the podcast, was I was watching a upload of an old episode of Top of the Pops, and they had you guys performing Happy by Surface, and I just emailed out on a whim and said, yo, these guys are dope, and I want to know everything about you guys, so I really appreciate you taking the time.
Sure. No, thank you. It's as I said, it's an honor. I'm really happy to expand on our story and share our story with everybody, all your listeners.
All right, now let's go ahead and get right into it. So, growing up in the UK, did you always have a love of singing, or was it something that maybe somebody said, hey, you got the voice for it, you should do this, or something that you love?
You know what? I came from a very musical family. I came from a family of a bunch of creatives, all artists and musicians and singers. So from a very young age, I was always exposed to it. My older brother is an artist called Glenn Goldsmith. He did quite a few things during the 80s and 90s. He worked with MC Hammer and had some big releases on RCA Records. He was quite a known soul artist across Europe. So from a young age, I had those kind of people in my family. I was the backing singer for him from the age of 5 years old. I was talking to my daughter the other day because she's a budding singer herself, and I was telling her that I was exposed to bands like from an early age, like Shalimar and lots of tenors, people who I tended to I kind of emulated them as I went onwards, but tenors like Shalimar, Michael Jackson, Curtis Heston, some really great soul powerhouses. So it was always a thing for us. Music's always been part of my. It's always been there. I've always picked up things up through that kind of osmosis as well. From a young age, I was learning to produce, write, exposed to electronic music. It was like you have people who are readers. For me, I gobbled up music. I was all about it. It was just part of me.
Right. You mentioned your brother Glenn Goldsmith. Did he have the song Dreamin'?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He did. He had the song "Dreaming" when I was a high schooler. He was quite a known star, very successful. He did very well. He's still out there. He's still very active at the moment. I think he had a UK soul #1 in the last 2-3 years as well. He's doing really well for himself.
Dope. Now, how much did you have to end up shelling out in pounds in order to get those US imports of albums?
Look, it was at the time. I think we're talking about CDs and stuff like that, aren't we? Are we talking about the 90s or talking about during the 80s?
80s,
um,
80s, 90s. I want to know, how much of your fish and chips money did you spend at the record store?
Look, to be honest with you, from a young age, I actually inherited a lot of music from my older brother. So my mum was really big on a lot of old jazz music, a lot of like late 60s soul and funk, some classical even. So we inherited quite a lot of music from our parents. Then my brother, being a bit older than me, he kind of caught wind of like the early kind of like soul and funk bands that were kind of happening around the UK. Also, some of the US bands that were making a bit of noise in the UK at the time. He was into early dance and disco and that kind of stuff. So he was bringing that music home. So I got to listen to that stuff for free. I got to listen to that stuff for free. Now, when I hit the age probably about 12, 13, and I had a bit of money to buy myself, I was big on a lot of like the early kind of like hip hop, and also where it was fused with R&B. So the Force MDs, New Edition, that kind of stuff. And that's when my pocket money started to go out the door. Okay? In terms of how much it cost, I mean, look, imports, standard CD to buy in the UK was probably like £15 at the time. I would probably spend double that on a US import, maybe even higher if I really wanted something. when I got to a later age, I also got into sample-based production. So I was selling out up to £100 on like, CDs that I could, vinyl that I could take home and sample, So now it was sky's the limit. If I wanted it, I'd just have it, But it was expensive, very expensive.
I bet that it cost a pretty penny. Or your other option was, if you knew somebody in the States, call them up and say, hey, I need this record. Can you send it over?
That's the one. That's the one. Well, fortunately, later on, as I started to move in certain circles, I could get things for free even. So I knew a lot of DJs coming up in the UK at the time, hip hop and R&B DJs. So I'd even get things on preview. I'd get white labels for free as well. I was quite savvy with that. I had my connects as well, so I was good with that.
Yeah, definitely. It always helps to have a connect or the plug to give you that inside scoop. Now, I was just recently looking at a documentary about the history of urban music on commercial radio in the UK. And what I found interesting was that it wasn't until 90 when Kiss FM got on the air that R&B music was pretty much considered underground, and you had pirate radio stations where your guys' version of what would be the FCC here in America would crack down on these stations, and they'll come from anywhere all over the UK, but that would be the main place where you would go to hear R&B, early rap, reggae. I mean, you guys heard loose ends and some of the acts that ended up breaking over here in America way before they made it stateside. So tell me how that was getting R&B before it became commercial in the UK.
Well, I'll tell you what, it was actually an amazing time for music. Like, so, from the age of 10 years old, I'm going to school and other kids from all backgrounds. I'm talking about young children who were like, they were like children of like first generation Indian immigrants or Pakistani immigrants, white children from East London whose families have been there for like, for centuries. These kids from age of 10 were singing a lot of like US and even UK underground R&B at school, the same way that people would sing along to hip hop music now. It was huge, and because we had to go and find it and sit there with like play and record on our tape decks, we really valued the music. So the underground thing actually put a lot of equity into R&B and R&B music, particularly the US electronic stuff and the underground stuff that was happening in London. It put a premium on it, and so it was a huge thing. It isn't like it is today where people make a song in their bedroom the night before and they release it the next day and it's accessible. Because you couldn't have it, you really needed to, you really went after it. It was a really great time, and a lot of great artists broke, off the back of it. I do recall a lot of the underground stations as well. Like, these are the ones that we all tuned into. But even during the early breakdancing days, from things like electronic music, we used to download the Electro 1s, Electro 2s. I think you guys would have been playing a lot of like the block party type hip hop stuff with like Cool Herc and whatnot. We would get those and we would release them in the UK as Electro 1, Electro 2, Electro 3, Electro 4. So you'd have people like Africa Bambaataa, Force MDs, those kind of groups, and Full Force. We'd be able to pick up those stuff. We caught wind of it through the underground stations. So it was a huge time. It was brilliant. I actually really missed those days, and I think it definitely solidified music in that and memory in that way, and it also created some huge careers for artists later on when money started getting pumped into them and everyone was kind of a bit more validated. It was fantastic.
Yeah, it definitely did. And during that time in the late 70s, early 80s, they were talking about in the documentary how in the main entertainment district in London, there wasn't really a lot of nightclubs that were catering to urban music and the urban use of the UK, where you had your soul nights, which was pretty much where Northern Soul would be played, but it was white ran, white owned. But it wasn't until I forgot the guy's name, had this club called Crackers, and it was really the first club where urban music was played and the youths were allowed to come in and not be hassled. And it brought to mind to me, I just saw the movie about 6 months to a year ago, Babylon. And for me as an American to see that there was that much racism amongst the blacks in the UK, it made me feel like it's no different than what was going on over here in America.
No, it's not too dissimilar. It's not too dissimilar. The racial tensions were always there. I think the difference between England and America, to be honest with you, is that, and it's something I've also experienced as being in Australia. That Australia is probably a little bit more like America in the way people move. In the UK, the fortunate thing is that we kind of are forced to live on top of each other. So how can I put it? everyone's exposed to each other. Because I think the worst thing about racism is the fact that people can tend to be quite ignorant about each other. And when you're ignorant, you kind of you lose sight of that humanity. You can't see yourself in others. With a lot of us growing up in the UK, if someone really didn't like you, they really didn't like you, and they had a valid reason for not liking you. But it wasn't because of ignorance, you generally kind of got on. But again, yeah, the tensions did kind of prevail as well. Obviously, the tensions always prevail because we always tend to like people that look like ourselves. So it's a little bit like America, but it's a little bit slightly more nuanced and complex.
Right.
Because at the same time, a lot of black artists from the US were seen as superstars in the UK, even bigger superstars than a lot of like the European counterparts. So in a way, it's a little bit kind of nuanced.
Right. Whereas over here in the States, you're very hyper segregated because if you go to a major city
right.
like your LA, your Chicago, your New York, blacks on this side of town, whites on this side of town, Jewish
right.
here, whatever immigrant group, you're in that section.
Right.
You don't really mix among each other.
That's right. And I see that as a bit of a luxury, to be honest with you. Like even in Sydney, it's like that. In Australia, you've got areas where there's purely Caucasian people, and there's purely an Italian community, like an Arabic community. It's like that here, and I kind of look at it and think, that's a luxury. Where us, we were having to live on top of each other, and it was actually a beautiful thing during the 80s. It made things less tense than they could have been,
right.
being exposed.
Right. And the one thing that I love about all of you guys from the UK and other countries too, is that how much you guys love our music over here and just add your own cultural spin to it.
That's right. Definitely. Yeah. That's a brilliant thing. I actually notice it particularly even now. My kids are playing some hip hop and everything. I'm seeing a lot of stuff coming out of places like even Sydney, like the hip hop outfits, or even the garage scene in the UK and the drill rappers. I really love. I like to see that spin, and it happens a lot in places like Paris as well. It's a beautiful thing to see. Definitely. I hear that.
Yeah, so tell me, did you start singing solo artist wise or in any other groups prior to the formation of MN8?
Before MN8, I was a solo artist. So when I was very, very young, I started producing and writing my own music, my own material. I had a New Jack Swing group, a young New Jack Swing group. We wanted to be like Basic Black and Troop and whatnot. And I would take my pocket money and I'd head up to studios in London from a very young age and produce my own New Jack Swing music and try to get on. At the same time, one of the guys in my group who ended up being one of the other guys, a co-founder of MN8, G-Man, Gary, he was a solo artist, a budding solo artist at the same time. So we were kind of orbiting each other. We'd bump into each other just in the local neighborhood. He always kind of looked out for me. He was like a big brother to me. He was a very good friend of one of my older siblings. And we connected, and we found out we had a lot of similarities in terms of our influences, and we started collaborating, and that's how MN8 kind of started to spawn. So we were initially a group called The Juice when we linked up, called The Juice, and we made a little bit of noise around London in terms of being like one of those up and coming New Jack Swing groups. We were there alongside groups like there was another group called at the time called Rhythm and Bass. Roses, that's right, and Wayne Hector and Ali Tennant. And they were the other kind of upcoming New Jack Swing group at the time. But it was relatively there were not many young, energetic groups that had that kind of angle. And yeah, we were the two that were making a bit of noise. So we were covered now and again in magazines like Blues and Soul at the time. We even had like an underground single that created a bit of a buzz, and we were interviewed on places like Kiss FM. Made a little bit of noise in the States with some of our music. We had a song called "Do the Nasty," which was released on an independent. And I think kind of showcase what we were kind of about, and that's how MN8 started to kind of percolate. That's how the idea behind MN8 started to percolate. We started realizing that we could actually do something with this. The idea initially was to just to get our foot in the door, but when it started to become something, and people started to go, basically, you guys look the part, and the way you guys perform, you guys really have something. You've got an energy and you've got a dynamism about you. Also, the way you sound, it's just really, really quite unique. You guys should start redeveloping your act. And I think that really spawned MN8. But for me personally, I was the guy. My influences were always like when I was coming up, I was watching the guys like the Ralph Tresvants, the Michael Jacksons, the Stevie Wonders. I wanted to be a superstar. Like I literally wanted to be a superstar. And when I met G-Man, he was the same kind of thing. He was that dude. He was watching he had his whole little Prince vibe, his whole little Casey. He was really big on Jodeci and acts like that. And he wanted to be out there. And we had this idea that we wanted to not just be like a group like Boys to Men, a do-what group. We wanted to actually go out and take over the world. And that was our vision. And that was what spawned all of that.
Right. And it makes me think, if y'all were shelling out that much in pounds and quints for US imports, imagine how much VHS copies of Soul Train went on the black market over there.
Of course. I think there was, obviously, with the black market, you also had a lot of people doing a lot of pirating as well. So we got to see those things anyway. You always knew a guy at the barber shop who had it on a VHS recording.
Right.
You
And
had a guy who could do that.
And where did Kule-T and Details come into the picture?
So Kule-T was a local singer that we knew. So when me and G were singing, we obviously had our idea for the Juice, we were called initially. And Kule-T was a singer. He used to do a lot of talent competitions in East London and do backing vocalists and singing choirs and whatnot. And we knew him. We kind of like within the same circles. Details was also Details was a performer. He was an entertainer. He was a dancer, an actor, a rapper. We always moved in the same circles, but we never wanted him in our group initially. We had the mindset that we wanted to really heavily curate our group. But sometimes the answers are right under your nose. Sometimes we go looking a little bit too farther afield when the answers are already there. And then one day we kind of linked up and we did a few rehearsals. We'd sing a cappella and doo-wop, and that's when we started realizing we had a little bit of a chemistry and a synergy, and that's how the whole thing came about. So we were all people who kind of knew each other, but when we put it together, it became something quite magical.
Right. So was M&8 always a 4-piece, or did you ever have a thought of expanding it to make it a 5-piece?
Well, we were actually initially a 2-piece, and then we actually before we actually decided to pull Details and Kule-T in the group, we actually were talking to our manager about working with a guy called there's an artist, a writer in the States called Ivan Matthias. He wrote a lot of stuff. I think he wrote for In Vogue. He wrote Don't Let Go for In Vogue. Amazing soul singer. He's of the ilk of like a Will Downing or a Luther Vandross. He's that kind of style, Hispanic guy. And it was going to be a 3-piece. It was just going to be us 3 together. And obviously, due to contracts and stuff, it kind of wasn't the perfect scenario. And we decided, rather than auditioning and looking further afield, obviously, pull in the guys we already knew, and create something that was kind of slightly more organic and natural rather than manufactured. And that's how it became the 4-piece. It almost became a 4-piece overnight. And it worked harmony-wise, definitely. It worked in terms of us being able to walk in a room and do what we had to do.
Right. So looking back at that time, did you guys go to a regular high school, or did you go to what would be like a performing arts high school in the UK?
Well, we all went to different schools. We went to different schools scattered across London. So we didn't grow up in that way together. The only one I grew up with was actually G-Man. So he was like I said, he was like an older brother to me. He left school a little bit earlier than me. We were all kind of separate, and I think in a way it was a good thing because how can I put it? It was when people see M&8, they see a group that we always thought of ourselves as being a bit of a super group. We saw ourselves as being 4 solo artists that kind of like linked up together. We saw ourselves as a bit of an interesting super group that also had the opportunity to have offshoots to be able to go solo later on. A bit like almost like a New Edition type idea. And so just growing up separately, going to different high schools, and that allowed us to be individuals, which was really good. But when we came together, we were more than we were as a singular.
Right. So when you guys got signed to the UK division of Columbia Records, was it the same grind, whereas you showcase for different labels and then they pick whether or not they want to sign you, or how'd you guys get your deal?
Well, that was a bit of a long story. The way we got our deal was off the back of me and G-Man releasing the initial single as The Juice. We had made a little bit of noise. We made a few connections with different music managers. A music manager who came along to see us, so actually a top A&R guy, he was a senior A&R guy in the UK, a guy called Mick Clark. He was seen as being like They call him the godfather of UK soul. I kind of think that's debatable. But he was the guy who signed Loose Ends. He signed Soul to Soul. He found a few heavyweight UK artists. He came along to the studio and saw us rehearsing, and believed that we could be something. He saw the potential, and he signed us to our major deal with Sony Columbia. The whole idea behind that as well was to develop us over a longer period of time for a release, and so we could become something. And what was significant about it at the time was, as you picked up as well, there was a lot of it was a huge thing in the UK because there wasn't a lot of support for homegrown black artists, let alone black artists in general in terms of the marketing budgets. But with ourselves, I mean, we got signed to quite a significant deal for what we were. The idea was to develop us and release a really kind of solid album and build us over a career. Unfortunately, at the time, Mick Clark, I think as a result of maybe partying a little bit too much, he had to kind of sit out. After signing us, we kind of missed out on having a person within Sony for probably like a period of 6 months to almost a year. So we were languishing on the label for about a year. After he got better, we kind of rushed together within the space of about 3 months. We recorded the M&8 album, the first M&8 album, and pushed it out. It wasn't the ideal scenario for us. So we to be honest with you, I'm giving you a bit of insight. We felt the album was a little bit rushed for what it was, just because we had that such a long time of sitting on the sidelines. But yeah, it got out. Now, once we released the album, once we scheduled a release date for the album, the idea was to really win hearts and minds. So we wanted this really exhaustive campaign to promote the first big black UK homegrown group in the UK. For Sony itself, we were the first group for probably the first groups for 10 years to have a homegrown number one, first R&B group, homegrown R&B group to have a top 10 single in the UK for the label. So the idea that was actually the focus. We wanted to be the biggest thing ever, and so it was a huge campaign we had to get going. We had to also become a priority within Sony to be able to do it. It was a massive ordeal we undertook. We did it in partnership with a really motivated manager we had at the time, a young hip hop manager called Ralph Daly. He was brilliant, and we became really regimented. And we went around the UK, and we worked really hard. Like we were performing 3 venues a day, school tours. We did it all. It was massive, exhausting.
Right. So what was the reaction like before you guys exploded doing those tours? Because like you stated at that time, it really wasn't a big reception for homegrown UK R&B acts, especially for what you guys were doing, because the first album came out in 1995. And
Right.
this little band that a guy by the name of Robbie Williams, Gary Barlow was in, called Take That, had split. So it was the time was right for a young, fresh group coming off of the Take That phenomenon.
Well, that's right. Well, that was the funny thing about it, is that when we when the label first saw us, the first thing they said, wow, they said, if you want to take that tour, you will steal all their fans, because the UK's never seen anything like you before. And it was I think it was the tail end of Take That. Take That was probably I think it was 2 years before they split, but they'd been huge for years. They came off the back of New Kids on the Block in the UK.
Right.
And yeah, sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I interviewed Danny Wood and I asked him what he thought about Take That, and he was like, they were good, and it just showed how much a phenomenon they were, to where Nigel Martin Smith said, hey, I want to do a UK version of that, and that led to Take That, and then that led to Louis Walsh creating Boyzone.
That's right. Exactly. So yeah, Take That, definitely. I lived through the whole thing. I had to endure the girls I liked at school being in love with the guys from New Kids on the Block for years. So I lived it from so many different perspectives. But then, yeah, I remember when Take That launched off the back of them. And Take That were absolutely, they obliterated the place. They had it all going on, and they totally met their marketplace. They were doing that real kind of early popular dance pop for audience that could resonate with them. But what we thought was missing in terms of ourselves, there was also, like we said, the underground culture of 90s R&B and hip hop. There was an audience that wasn't being tapped into, and they weren't being met. And the music that we were listening to, me and my friends of all backgrounds, white, black, Indian, Arabic, we were all listening to that urban New Jack Swing, that, listen to the production of Marley Marl and LL Cool J, and we were listening to Jodeci, and we were listening to High Five and all these groups. And they've served that teen audience, but Take That weren't meeting that marketplace. So we also were a band that could come in, and we wouldn't necessarily have to cross over. We could just use our platform to reach like a massive audience that was developing and buzzing.
Right.
So we weren't completely in direct competition with them, and we wouldn't want to do that anyway. We actually thought Take That was perfect for what they were doing. But the idea for us is that using the same platform, yeah, we could basically well, I think the terminology that the label manager used was, he said, look, if we put you guys out, you'll have to stop the world to get off. It will be absolutely huge.
Right. So when you guys got signed to Columbia, did you guys also have access to work with people within the US division? And did you go to the label and say, hey, we want to not only be big in the UK, but we also want to try to break in the US market simultaneously?
Yes, definitely. So one of the things that Sony spotted about us when they were signing us, they said, look, you guys don't really just look like a UK homegrown group. You look like an international group. You look like a group that could take over the world. You look like you could be absolutely huge. Because we found, just tracking back a little bit to that comment I made earlier on about us growing up in different parts of London and going to different high schools, there was something there was a subculture that was happening in the UK in terms of things like R&B, and you probably see it a little bit in the States yourself. You see there's some groups that can be a little bit parochial and inward looking. You might have a group that might come from a certain town or a suburb, and they tend to just kind of like, they move in certain circles, they move in certain networks, kind of very cliquey, and they don't tend to really look out. They don't really tend to look like a group that can really break out of that little community. Like being the best group in New Jersey, or the best group in, you know what I mean, in Brooklyn. And they tend to move in those circles, and then they tend to measure themselves against who else is there. With us, we were always, because we were so different. I mean, our heroes weren't Tony from down the street. Our heroes were like Michael Jackson. Our heroes were like Prince. Our heroes were like, you know, Glenn Jones. The people that we grew up listening to in isolation. So when we came out, we were ready to take on. We were looking to the greats, and we were ready to take on like this massive task of being something that transcended borders and transcended culture. We wanted to be something a lot huger. Sorry, just going back to your question, you mentioned about the states, about stateside. So Sony was always looking further afield with us anyway. So when we were on the verge of releasing, we got a US manager. Our US manager was a guy by the name of Pete Thomas. He is the guy, you'll see Pete Thomas on Real Housewives of Atlanta of late. I think he was recently on. But he was a huge, I'd say he was a bit of a mover and a shaker in the States. He started a conference called the How Can I Be Down conference. And he would bring together a lot of bigwigs, like back in the day, from people like Russell Simmons to Suge Knight to Puff Daddy. He was just a go-to. And the idea with this conference was to provide secrets to people who are up and comers, and also create some kind of cohesion and networking amongst a lot of like black players within the urban. I hate using the term urban, within the urban music scene. So when we signed to him, he made a lot of connects for us, and that's where a lot of the remixes we did came from. At the time, it coincided with Puff Daddy leaving Uptown Records with Andre Harrell. It's rumored that obviously he got fired or whatever, and he went and set up Bad Boy Records, and he was looking to have a jump off point, and that's when Pete Thomas approached him about remixing "I Feel Something for You" for M&A. I think he did it for the equivalent of about $2,000, because he just wanted to have something there. And so that became one of the first things that Puff Daddy did for Bad Boy, which is interesting story.
And that is crazy how that record was one of Diddy's first remixes. And then for you guys to get I Got a Little Something For You featured on the Bad Boy soundtrack with Martin and Will Smith at their peaks, that was just huge.
Yeah, that was huge. That was huge for us. And the funny thing about it, even looking back today, I think sometimes sometimes you find that the marketplace isn't ready for something. Like things that we were doing back then, more like things that people do now. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think the market was ready for it. I think if it happened now, there'd be a little bit more noise about it. But at the time, the things that we were doing were so huge and so ambitious that I think people kind of missed it a little bit. But yeah, for us it was massive. So when we released I've Got, there was a lot of, we had some really good people on our team, working with us, Pete Thomas and Ralph Daly, and a few people we had in the UK label in the States. We also got signed to the Work Group in America, and the Work Group was responsible for the soundtrack to Bad Boy Records. sorry, for the Bad Boy movie. So they had us, they had Puff Johnson, they had Diana King, and they also had who is the really amazing singer? He's a really amazing singer. He sang "Love Is on the Way" for Will. I can't remember. It was there was a movie with Bette Midler and Diane Keaton. I can't remember. He's also quite a flamboyant guy. He goes to all the awards now. He dresses up in like amazing like Phoenix dress ups. He's a musical singer. I can't remember the guy's name. Amazing singer. It'll come to me later on. Yeah, they had artists like that on their label that were looking to break, and so a lot of us featured on the Bad Boys soundtrack as a result. And it was an excellent vehicle for us, and it put us in really good company. And we were on there. We went from being a group that was really trying to take over the UK and Europe to being a group that was in really good company with people like Warren G, Tupac, Notorious B.I.G., The Brat, Outkast. It was really good company for us, and that was really, we saw ourselves in that space. We saw ourselves in that space. And even when we went to America, we were received in that way.
Yeah.
So it was a really good time. Everything was really, really positive.
Yeah, because
looking up.
Yeah, because looking at your guys' look, it was like you guys definitely studied all of the male R&B groups of the time over here in America, especially Jodeci, with the way that you guys looked, with the dress, and then with the underwear that was showing M&8. I mean, it just screamed the bad boy look.
Yeah, we lived it. Like we really did live it. Like if I to just reiterate slightly, sometimes like you can watch something from afar and you want to copy something. For us, we were living it in real time. So we were immersed in it, and the way I saw that kind of culture myself personally, for me, that transcended any particular place. It was just a sound. It was a different plane of existence. And so for us, we were all about it. I wasn't looking at the guy down the road from me. I was looking at the people. I was looking at the greats. One day we would have been featured. We would have been recorded with Michael Jackson. That's the way we viewed it. These music is a different language to us. So it, to a certain extent, yeah, it was paying a lot of homage and respect to people, but we really lived it and loved it. It was our world, and it was I think that kind of focus was a focus that a lot of our counterparts didn't have in the UK, and it was part of our success. That we were really authentic about it.
And the debut album, To the Next Level, went top 20 UK pop, top 5 UK R&B. It went silver. And for those of us that's not familiar with the BPI's ranking of albums, silver is the third rung between gold and platinum. So if an album sells silver in the UK, that means it sold, I believe, 60,000 units. If it goes platinum, it sells, I want to say maybe 300,000. And if it goes gold, it sells 100,000 units. So that'll be the equivalent of the RIAA over here in America. Now,
that's right.
The big thing that you guys accomplished with that song, it beat out Seal as #1 best-selling single in the UK for that year. Kiss from a Rose was a huge single, and you guys topped him, but that song was kept out the #1 spot on the pop charts by a little ditty by Miss Celine Dion.
Yes. There's an interesting story behind that as well. It's funny. Even today, like I talked to my wife about, my wife's a massive fan of Celine Dion. She loves all these singers. She loves the Whitney Houstons and whatnot. And she knew of times when Celine Dion was like, I do see Celine Dion as a peer. Like at the time, she was really making waves in the UK. She had the same people working with her team as we did. We'd sit rehearsing together and everything. It was that kind of, it wasn't competition, but we moved in those kind of circles. And we were kind of like a bit like when Celine Dion had this huge record during that time when M&8's I've Got Something For You was out. Huge number one single. It was there for kind of forever. And she was a priority with the label at the time. So they'd already, they'd achieved their target of having the #1 in the UK. We were #2. And in terms of breaking a new black group, there would have been nothing better than to pull her off the #1 spot and put us on. So Sony, we felt Sony had the luxury of being able to say, look, Celine, we're going to pull your single off and we're going to put M&8 into #1. We thought it would have been a nice touch, but obviously, they didn't. I think she remained the priority with the label, and we were kind of kept on. I understand how that kind of moves, but yeah, that would have been a nice touch because we had that #1. It would have kind of solidified us. We would have kind of arrived. It would be like probably today's equivalent of winning like The Voice or something.
Right.
It would have been really good for us career-wise.
Right.
Really
so what was it like when you guys got the call to be on Top of the Pops, which is a British institution on the BBC
Yes, it
for
is.
decades. Generations grew up on Top of the Pops.
Yes,
It's
it
no
is.
longer on the air in its weekly form, but it's still on the air as its Christmas special. And can you explain to me, as a music head from the US, how come the Christmas number one is such a huge deal in the UK?
Okay, okay. The Christmas number one is a huge. I'll start with that first. Christmas number one is a huge deal in the UK because, it's a time when everything stops. Everything stops. The whole music industry grinds down. If you get the Christmas number one, you're kind of like solidified in people's hearts and minds, not just for that Christmas, but kind of forever. It's a bit of an occasion in the UK, and because everything shuts down, there are no more releases. You're hearing that on rotation for like the next 2-3 months. It kind of puts you in a place. It's something people vie for. So that's where the Christmas number one's so important. In terms of ourselves being on top of the pops, it was massive. That was where I tuned in to watch people like I said, all my heroes like D Train and Kool and the Gang and New Edition. That's where I tuned in to see all the greats. For ourselves though, being on there was a point that we got to with M&8 where we knew where we wanted to go and how big we wanted to be. And for us, it got to the point that things like Top of the Pops was a bit of a formality for us. And I don't mean that in a way of looking down on it. I looked at it more in the way as that's where we thought we needed to be. If we worked really, really hard and we kind of shot for the we shot for the moon and hit the stars, we'd end up on shows like that anyway. It became part and parcel of what we were trying to achieve as one of the young big black groups of the time. We really thought that it was where we should be. For us, more than anything else, it was more when we got on shows like that. It was more about how can we emulate this and how can we keep this going. So it was brilliant being on that. I think once you get a number 2 single or a top 10 single in the UK, you're going to be on the show. But for us, it was like, okay, we've done this. How can we keep this going? Or how can we top it? How can we keep this moving? A lot of people will see that as the goal and then they'll fall off. But for us, it was like, yeah, how can we build on this?
Right. And then another thing that I found interesting as far as UK television is concerned, that Saturday mornings, you guys were very big on Saturday morning programming for kids, tweens, and teens. You guys had programs such as Going Live, Live and Kicking, and then you guys did the Australian equivalent, Hey, 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 it's Saturday. So what was that like going to perform on those shows, knowing that the market that you were trying to reach, it fit what they were showing on those programs on Saturday mornings in those countries?
It was highly important. It was highly important having those media kind of outlets for us to be able to reach and connect with the kids who liked our music, particularly being what we were as a young black group as well. When people got to see us on those shows, they got to see the humanity. They got to see themselves in us, rather than just seeing these guys dancing about on stage and seeming like they were a million miles away. They had an opportunity to connect and see themselves in us. For me, growing up in the UK. Myself, I knew the importance of these Saturday shows. The weather's so bad in the UK that you spend most of your time indoors watching TV shows. You watch your cartoon flicks in the morning, and then you watch your favorite music bands perform on these TV shows. So it was highly important and really crucial to our career being on those shows. It really helped to springboard us. It was crucial to us. They were our
Right.
lifeblood.
Sounds like weather in the UK was like Seattle, Washington, where it's
Mhm.
rain, it's cloudy, dreary. There's nothing to do but to either stay inside and watch TV or go to a greasy spoon and get something to eat.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. So everything becomes slightly inward looking. It's like you read a book or you listen to an album or you watch your favorite TV show. That becomes your highlight. That becomes the thing you do. So because of that captive audience, it's a real opportunity for a young band or someone who has something to offer to really put themselves out there, and be known.
Right.
Got a captive audience there.
Right. And whose decision was it to cover Happy by Surface, which I didn't know until maybe a year or so ago, that was originally done by a UK group called, I think, High Tension was their name. It
Yes.
wasn't really a
Yes.
big hit for them until Surface said, we're going to record it for ourselves. It became a
Yeah.
huge hit, and then was later sampled by Carl Thomas and Cool G Rap and
Uh-huh.
Nas for Fast Life. So who idea
Yep.
was it for you guys to cover Happy?
All right, it's a bit of a long story, but I'm going to get into it a little bit. If you recall, I was talking about when we got signed by Mick Clark for on Sony, the legendary A&R guy. Rest in peace, by the way. He passed away about 3 years ago. So I also need to be quite respectful when I talk about him as well. But what happened, because that lag time when he was quite unwell, during the time when we were developing our sound and our album to be released, we missed out on a lot of the love that he would normally would have given to a lot of the acts he'd signed. So I'm in no one's in not dress it up. I'd say that the album initially was a bit of a rush job. We were thrown in the studio with a bunch of up and coming producers, and we had to make the best of a bad situation. So we ended up with this demo of about, probably like 10, 15 songs that we kind of didn't have a lot of input on. We didn't have a lot of, creative input in. And for the, compared to where we kind of saw ourselves before, what we were trying to be, it was kind of slightly missing the target in terms of the music that was already chosen for the album. So we sat down and we brainstormed. Now, I'd spent a lot of time in the studio myself, because it was like, kind of like a New Edition type situation where, they based the sound around my voice. So a lot of the M&8 sound was actually myself. So I spent a lot of time in the studios, and I had a bit of license to pick and choose songs that I wanted to record. So things like, I've got something for you. I pulled that out of a stash of demos, and I reworked it with the producers for the group to sing. I was big on a lot of early groups like Immature, and I kind of saw it like a Munchies type track, and I reworked that with the group. And also Happy was another one that would kind of like it would allow us to still keep that pop sound that would resonate with the British community, but also it also hinted at a lot of the New Jack Swing music that was around and what was to come. That whole 808 sound, electronic kind of synths mixed with that really, really cool school kind of sound, And so Happy was a song that was suggested by a young head of radio, a young girl called Sam Withy. She became a really good friend. She's still a good friend now. She was a young girl, same age as us, listened to the same music that we did in East London. And she was like, I can totally hear you singing this song. Okay. I can totally hear you singing this song. So she helped to fight for us to get to record it. And so that got on. So that was that song, Baby It's You, Only Let Me In, and I Wasn't Before You Were Before, that we battled to put on the album to create that M&8 sound we have. Then what we did with the track was we recorded it in a studio in West London called I can't remember, the Monroe Studios, I think it was. Marcus Studios was the name of it, with an up and coming producer called Andy Whitmore. Andy Whitmore was a guy that played on a lot of stuff for Alexander O'Neill, and he played some really, really quite huge bands. Ten Shot Derby, played for Elton John. He was a really accomplished keyboard player, a bit of a maestro. So he understood where that song was coming. He was a bit of a soul boy. He understood where that song was coming from. So he managed to lace it with his feel and try to give it a bit of an authentic feel. And so that's where we kind of sat with Happy at the time. Interestingly enough, we went on to tour with that song. We eventually got on. I know you'll probably bring this up later on, but we went on to tour with Janet Jackson for about 3 months on her 95 Janet tour. We toured for about 3 months consistently and became very close with a lot of her bandmates, because Janet isn't really messing about when she chooses the people that tour with her. A lot of her bandmates are really accomplished musicians that played a lot of stuff, and I managed to make good friendships with a guy called Brian Simpson. Brian Simpson called me up one day and he said, "Hey," "Okay, do you know that I wrote for the first time for Surface?" He said, "I was a producer and writer for Surface." He said, "I also played on the original of Happy, and I really like what you guys did with it, And I thought it was a really nice touch. It made a lot of sense of it later on. But yeah, there's a huge story behind that. Also led to the Jodeci remix as well, obviously through Pete Thomas. Dalvin got on, and he got a chance to show what he was about on that track. And the beautiful thing about working with Jodeci on that track as well, they actually found it was quite refreshing to work with ourselves, because they really liked that clean pop sound we had, because Jodeci are all about it. They're I don't have to tell you who Jodeci are, what they're about. And they found it quite refreshing to do something slightly different. And they really liked our take on what was happening and what they were looking to do as well.
Yeah, definitely. Jodeci, big, and they're from my home state of North Carolina. Yeah. So, I was like super hyped, and to see that you guys worked with Dalvin on a special mix for Happy, it just made me feel like, man, you guys are like all that. And then also at the same time, 3T was making some noise over in Europe. They just released Brotherhood, which my favorite album. Then also Backstreet Boys and NSYNC were just going over to Europe to cut their teeth
Yes.
before they came back over here to the States to be polished. So what was that like seeing 3T explode? Because I think one year they were the second biggest group in the UK next to the Spice Girls, and then seeing
That's
the
right.
infancy of Backstreet Boys and NSYNC before they came worldwide phenomenons.
That's right. Look, I really, we really got on really well with the guys from 3T. I remember bumping into them for the first time when I think we were in Germany or something, and they'd come to see their aunt Janet when she was touring, and they were young, quiet kids. And it didn't even hit me that they weren't to be musicians, but they obviously being part of that family, I was probably a little bit naive to assume that they wouldn't be releasing. But yeah, they were cool kids, and I remember the guys would heckle me and go, "Hey, there's a group called 3K. They should be called 3KGs." Because they remind me of you. They had that whole look that we had and the whole thing, and they had that Jackson thing to go with it. I thought they were really really cool. And yeah, no, they're really really good lads, and yeah, I really like what they did, like their spin on things. They kind of came slightly after M&A, and yeah, I copped it heaps. They were like, oh my god, there's 3KGs. I always thought they were more Michael Jackson version. But they were good. They were good. Backstreet Boys, they came up at a time when we were promoting, when I told you we went on this really exhaustive promotional exercise to promote M&A and really win hearts and minds because people had never seen a group like us before. We went on this thing in the UK, and they call them road shows in the UK. And it's when you take an act and you get him on all the major kind of festivals. Like they're always linked with like a kids magazine. So I don't know, maybe in the States you have magazines like Right On Magazine and a few of the teeny pop magazines. They would actually have an event component to what they would do, like a live component of what they did when they bring live tours to an audience using the branding of a magazine. So we'd get on many magazine tours, like Now magazine tour and Smash Hits magazine tours, and that's when we got to move around with a lot of the big bands. We got to tour, we got to perform alongside groups like Take That and Boyzone and E17. A lot of the big bands from the day, even some groups like Snap and groups like EYC and Two in a Room, groups that would kind of made a bit of noise overseas. And with M&A, our thing was always to bring that was to really show, we wanted to be superstars. We wanted to go on stage and be the hugest everything. We got to really show what we were about. We had a different spin on, a different take on things to a lot of the other groups that were performing with us. And quite often people would say, oh, we were the act of the night, the act of the evening. And we were making a lot of noise, and especially when we came with that whole P-Funk inspired 7669 kind of like urban, chunky, something for you sound. When we came with that and the way we would perform it, we caught the attention of a lot of American acts that were looking to break the UK. Because what they saw in us, they saw a way of doing it without being too European. They saw a UK act that was breaking it using the same kind of language that you guys have overseas. And a few of those bands are bands like New Kids on the Block and NSYNC. I remember meeting sorry, not New Kids on the Block, sorry, Backstreet Boys. I remember meeting Backstreet Boys backstage for the first time, I think, in France. And the whispers was like, there's a young group, they're going to be like New Kids on the Block, and these guys love you. These guys think you guys are amazing, and they're really looking to you to create their new sound and break the UK market, and we were quite flattered by it. We'd tour with them and we'd hang out with them quite a bit. We'd be singing doo-wop with them backstage. We were playing computer games with Nick Carter, and we toured quite closely together. Sometimes you're just thrown together with each other, and we spend weeks and months touring together around the UK and Europe, breaking our acts. At the time, there was a producer. His name was we went to the Swedish Music Awards, I think around 95, and bumped into a producer called Herbie Cricklow. He was a young guy that came from North London, really, really talented rapper, producer. And he had a bunch of songs for us. He was working with, I think, Dennis Pop and Max Martin at the time. This is prior to Britney Spears and all the big stuff that came out years later. And he was really keen to write some of M&8's music, because he had some stuff that would suit our sound. He went on to write songs like Get Down and We Got It Going On, which sounded quite eerily reminiscent of our sound, And those songs eventually went to groups like Backstreet Boys, and obviously they sold it to their audience and did what they did and blew up. I mean, you got to do what you got to do, hey. and yeah, the rest is history. It was all quite how can I put it, incestuous in terms of the sound and the way we were kind of moving and working with other acts. And I think Backstreet Boys kind of benefit from being exposed to bands like ourselves. I
Yeah.
think kind of unfairly people accused them of stealing our sound. I think something I wanted to kind of expand a little bit. They did. I don't think they had any say so in terms of stealing our sound, but they definitely benefited from a band like us being around, and building that platform.
Yeah, they definitely did because they released We Got It Going On here in America, and I think it was like
Yeah,
93. Didn't take off over
that's right.
here, but it exploded in
That's right.
Europe, and that's where the infamous Lou Pearlman sent them over to say, hey, you guys are going to work over here because you guys are
Uh-huh.
exploding, because the pop market was already ready over in the UK for
That's
them,
right.
because over here in America, New Kids was gone and it was pretty much gangster rap and grunge. So pop wasn't really
That's right.
in America at the time. But once Hanson and Spice Girls broke over here in America, that's where they were like, okay, fellas, it's time to come back home.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, definitely won the marketplace from. Interesting thing with Backstreet Boys for us, the way if you were there at the time in the UK, the way they were to M&8 was kind of how you'd say New Kids on the Block was to New Edition. That was how they were received compared to M&8. If you understand what I'm talking about. So that New Kids on New Edition was spawned by Maurice Starr, and I think New Kids on the Block was spawned by Maurice Starr as well.
Correct.
You could say that with Backstreet Boys, the way they reached that other audience, they tapped into an audience that looked like them and connected with them, was the same way that Backstreet Boys managed to take what we were doing and take it to their audience, in a way that didn't require a lot of work,
Mm-hmm.
And for us, we re-experienced it first, and we're like, wait a second, this is but I've got to say it with a dose of respect. It wasn't without discrediting them. Those guys worked really, really hard. They worked really, really hard, and they knew what they were doing, and they executed a plan. But yeah, the way it kind of went over was, it came over kind of like the Osmonds to the Jacksons kind of thing.
Right. And
And
you mentioned
yeah,
Herbie, he did Gotta Be You for 3T, which for me was my favorite cut off of
yeah,
the Brotherhood album. Because when I heard that and then heard the US debut of Backstreet Boys, I was like, 3T kind of had that early Backstreet Boys sound before they exploded.
yes. That's right. That's right. Three T were look and sound wise. Again, it was a melting pot. As you know, it's much like how you may observe the New Jack Swing era. You see people like I don't know what Guy was doing, and then you see Bobby Brown with My Prerogative. He didn't copy Guy, but he kind of followed that sound. It was a really nice buzz happening around '95 where you had like this little a beige looking dude like myself with braids in my hair singing smooth, and then you had 3T come out, and they kind of looked like that, but they had that kind of Jackson-esque feel to it. And then you had like this whole European sound that Herbie was kind of creating with Max Martin and Dennis Pop in the States, and those guys. And then you had Backstreet Boys, which had another tinge on it. It was like this really real nice little buzz. It was a bit like Uptown, or a bit like what was happening. It was a real cool kind of like cool time for what was to come afterwards.
Yeah, definitely that. And you mentioned you guys went on tour of E17. Now, E17, I thought was super dope. I thought Deep was a good record, but the one record by E17 I really loved was Ghetto. Brian Harvey could have fit in the US as an R&B singer easily.
Yeah, Brian Harvey was a good singer. He was a talented dude. He with E17. The funny thing with E17 was, if anything, I think M&A E17's market was very close to M&A. So when you had Take That, with that whole kind of dance kind of thing, they called them the kind of acts that kind of like Take That was a kind of act that would kind of lure in the girls and the grannies, really safe pop boy next door kind of thing. Whereas E17 were a little bit rough around the edges. They were like your I'd say they were the boy band version of Eminem. If I had to say, they were bringing like they were bringing kind of like a slight black influence sound to a Caucasian marketplace that wasn't really that familiar with it. So they kind of really warmed the marketplace up for acts like ourselves. When by the time we came out, that marketplace was quite receptive to bands like M&8.
Mm.
Brian Harvey, even when we would tour, I got on very well with Brian Harvey. We'd do a lot of like magazine shoots together. We'd always catch up. It was like, sometimes when you see people and you connect, we connected with them quite well. But they had their own little tensions, I think, in their own group. Some people wanted to have a different direction. Brian Harvey, his heart was purely in R&B. His heart was purely in R&B. So they were an interesting group. I think Brian Harvey, we were the sort of band that he wanted to take that to E17 to be. We were the kind
Right.
of band that he wanted him to be.
Yeah, because I noticed Take That tried to add a little bit more urban influence on the Nobody Else album. Because like, sure, it had a very R&B sound, but their look, like you and I both know, straight
Yeah,
pop. While you guys
yeah,
in E17 had more of the Jodeci extended, where it was more edge. And I'm real good friends with Mark Gay from Shy, and I had told him
uh-huh,
about when E17 covered if I ever fall in love with
yes,
Gabrielle, and he was
yeah,
like, man, it just goes to show how much influence the US has all over the world, to where you're looking at us and just taking what local elements you guys got, putting your own spin. Now, when you guys did the Smash Hit Polls Party, for those of us that are not in the know, Smash Hits would be like the UK equivalent to what 16 or Tiger Beat would be in America, where you do your colorful layouts and you do those dumb questionnaires where they ask, what's your favorite food? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite
yeah,
song? Ideal girl. Did you hate doing
yeah.
those?
um, um, they do become exhaustive, but I kind of understand from the point of view as of a young kid who's kind of curious, who kind of wants to know more about the act. You know, if you're a young kid, you're impressionable. It gives the respond the opportunity to connect with the artist. So I kind of it was exhausting, but I kind of understood the why. You know, I know exactly what you mean. I kind of understood the why. It was important to still do it and connect with those people. It was an opportunity to let people what we're about. Someone just even thinking that, hey, KG, you're a Virgo, you're like me. People can make those connects, and they can connect with you on that human level. So it was frustrating, but it was important. It was
Right.
important to do
And
those things.
you guys come off the success of the debut album, and you guys are going to make the sophomore album Freaky. What was that process
Uh-huh.
like, knowing that you guys are huge and you're going to the studio to create the follow-up, and it has to be just as good, if not better, than the debut?
That was where things became a little bit kind of slightly trickier. So where we were with certain management, they had if I have to put it in a really no uncertain terms, I'd say that there was incentive for the people that were looking after us to have us use certain producers. The producers were in their stable. They had certain elements of control, and I suppose there were probably some certain types of it kind of made financial sense for them without being accusory of anything. When it came to things like Freaky, the idea of M&8 initially was for us to be able to go and record an album on our own terms and put our sound out to the world. But when we got to the point where we were recording Freaky, we didn't get as much love from the labels, for the label to do what we wanted to do. And there were a few things that had happened, a few moving parts in the background a few things that happened in the background that kind of didn't serve us so well. And we found that by the time we got to do Freaky, a lot of the support that we had earlier on just kind of wasn't there as much. They kind of left us almost to our own devices, and the curation wasn't there as much, and the promotion wasn't there as much. The important thing for us, though, was M&8, was we wanted to slowly start to try to affect what we wanted to do. So we went through that period of releasing a bunch of recording a bunch of demos with the same producers, probably 4 or 5, and then we were sent away to a studio up in an area called Liverpool in England, slightly up north to where we are in London. And it's Phil Collins' studio. It's where Genesis used to record their massive epic albums. It's go and camp out there for like weeks on end and record these huge rock albums. So we got to live in this space, fully decked out studios with Neve desks and the whole bit. And we had a chance to pull in producers that we wanted to work with. So I kind of took a little bit of lead on that. I was the one in the group that was like, I was known as the producer within the group. Every group has their own in-house producer and visionary. I was the guy. So I pulled in a lot of producers that I'd worked with. A guy called Peter Ibsen Paleface. He does a lot of stuff he does lots of music now for people like Talisa and a few other UK and European acts. And I pulled in another guy called Mark Lewis, who was he was a bit of a hip hop producer. He used to work for Def Jam. Did a lot of like really good remix work. I pulled in my brother to work on some stuff and a few other session musicians. We managed to craft a few songs that sounded a little bit more like where we wanted to go. But I found that because we had that kind of pull and input, again, the love wasn't there from the label, and that kind of fed into how that album was actually recorded. It was the first time we actually released an album and fans didn't know it was even out. You know, it was like those kind of things were going on in the background, and we kind of thought, oh, wait a second, the writing's on the wall here, you know, and that was when things started to go a little bit pear-shaped.
Right. And normally when that happens, when the label's not supporting you or you don't have a champion inside the label going to bat for you to the major heads, that's when you don't really get the promo dollars. You're not going on all the big music shows. You're not going on BBC One or Capital Radio, or you're not getting on Top of the Pops or CD UK. And that's when it's starts to, I know you're probably surprised that I know so much about UK stuff, right?
No, I'm not actually. I think I'm not surprised. You're actually quite well informed. I don't think you would have come into this, you know, half prepared. I've listened to your interview, so yeah, no. I'm not that surprised, but I'm glad you've done your research. Really glad.
Yeah.
We can have a good conversation about it.
Yeah, like I was telling you, you know, I have a definitely strong love and respect for everything that came out of the UK, because I'm a big pop fan. You know, from Spice Girls to Another Level to Five to Damage, who I felt should have blown up here in America, but it just shows that music is colorblind. It knows no boundaries, no regions. It's all one and the same. Now, with the second album not really doing as well as the debut, Tough Act to Follow, and I believe it was only 2 singles that was released off of the sophomore album. Was there ever a point where you guys kind of felt like, okay, we've done all that we can do here at Columbia. Should we try to go shop at another label? Should we take an indefinite hiatus? And was there ever tension with the other guys in the group where you were pretty much the primary focus and they felt like, hey, I want to do more. I want to show what I can do as well?
Definitely. You picked up on a lot. So yeah, definitely. Look, I'll start with the tension surrounding everything. So when we were looking to get on, obviously the most important thing for us as a young group, when we were young M&A and we were banding about London, singing on tubes, as a doo-wop group, you know, busking and doing all the things we did. We had these dreams of being as big as, if not bigger than, Jodeci. You know, we wanted to be the hugest thing ever. We wanted to have careers like the Jacksons or New Edition and go solo and do all these amazing things later on. When we came across an opportunity through the label we signed to, we thought, okay, look, you know, it isn't the most ideal label deal for us. They're paying a lot of money, but in terms of control, it didn't give us everything we wanted it to give us. But we thought, you know, it will get us on, and when people get to see us, we'll connect with people in a way that will secure everything in the future. Also, we'll negotiate that later on. We'll have that kind of control, you know, in the second, third, or fourth albums, and start building and forging those separate careers for ourselves. Now, when it got to a point that where we started recording the first album, because of the sound and because of what was popular at the time, and because out of all the guys in the group, I mean, I kind of, you know, I probably had the more unique sound of the guys at the time, and it helped to create, you know, the M&8 sound for a while, and I was thrust into the front. I kind of, how can I put it? It was kind of off script for a lot of the other guys in the group. We were a group a little bit like New Edition, like I said before. And I suppose to use an example, I recently saw Ralph Tresvant talking in an interview. I can't reference the interview right now, but it's one of the recent ones in the last 3 or 4 months. And he was talking about the New Edition guys going solo, Belmont DeVoe and Bobby Brown and Johnny Gill doing their things, but whereas when in New Edition they were all behind him. And he said this thing. He said, "Look," he said, "the thing with New Edition that people didn't realize is the reason why these things had to happen was because there was so much talent within the group, and the group didn't always provide the outlet for these people to go out and be who they wanted to be." And I think, so for us, the same thing with M&8. I said, when we got together, we were all solo artists with something to offer. When we were in M&8, they were bunched together behind me, creating a sound. It didn't necessarily, you know, I don't think it was necessarily always the most fulfilling thing for those people as individuals. And for it, I kind of was on the out. I was the same things that I don't know if you saw the New Edition biopic.
I've seen it plenty of times. Plenty of times.
Okay, excellent. Exactly what happened to Ralph Tresvant is exactly what I went through. So exactly the way he was viewed by the band members, exactly the same opportunities to go solo, all those things that were happening was exactly what happened to me within the group. I understood it. I understood it from their side and I understood it from my side, but it just was what it was. And I always held out hope that we'd get to a point where, you know, they would get to do their solo things, or we would get to do something later on. But I was also quite adamant that the sound had to be what the sound was, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you add that to the politics that were going on around M&A being the first black group, and obviously the same thing that typically happens to every group that makes a lot of noise, you have great people who are out there to really help, but you also have a lot of sharks. You have a lot of people who are looking to get what they can from you, you know. And you know, if you have a contract from someone who seems well-meaning, you better read the fine print and have your lawyer look over it, because people will always will always give contracts to you that totally serve their own interests. So there were things like that were happening around us, and the guys, as a collective, with all of this stuff buzzing around us, we felt that we were in a bit of a pressure cooker situation. But for me, because everyone was in a pressure cooker situation, I became the target of a lot of those things within the group, if you understand what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And for a little stint, it became a little bit counterproductive, you know?
Right.
So this all happened around the time of the second album. And our relationship wasn't the best it could be. Very similar to what was happening in the audition. It wasn't the best situation. Okay, I've seen it before. You see it with the Jacksons. You see it with the way Jermaine may have looked at Michael Jackson when he went solo. You know, Jermaine was like, if you watch the Jacksons, Jermaine was coming up before Michael was singing. Jermaine was the guy, you know. Jermaine was the first one to go solo, went with Motown, you know, so he kind of felt he should have had his way. But when Michael was coming up and he had a little bit of something and he was resonating with people in a certain way, I think it caused a little bit of friction there, you know, that relationship you can see from afar. So those things, like I said before, they were happening with M&A, and it was happening at a time when the industry wasn't really, the people that were supporting us on the first album weren't supporting us as much. People were looking to make as much money out of us as they could. And for us, we reached a point where it was like, you know what? We've made a little bit of money for ourselves. We made a little bit of a name for ourselves. Perhaps this is the platform. Perhaps this is the best it will ever be, right? So we thought, you know what we'll do? Instead of negotiate our way into a new contract straight away, you know, because our relationship was a little bit fractured, a little bit tense. We love each other like brothers. You know, I've got a bunch of brothers myself, so my brother Glenn and a few other brothers I have, and we don't always get on. And what we do is we separate. We have time apart from each other, and then we get back together. So with us with M&8, we kind of thought, you know what, this is really tense. Instead of us go and sign a deal straight away with all these and being a bit dysfunctional and fractured, let's just take some time out. You know, the band never ever broke up. The band's actually still together today. Funnily enough, we check in on each other all the time. Christmas, birthdays, you know, we're always keen to know what each other are doing, and we're always lining up. We're always looking out for the next tour. We're looking for an opportunity to get together and do something in the future. But for us at the time, because of what the industry was doing to us, and because of, you know, our fractured relationships, it was easier to go and have lives, you know, create lives for ourselves and do the things we never got to do, you know,
Yeah.
and grow ourselves as individuals. And so it's been a good thing, but it wasn't really the way it should have gone. But I think that's what needed to happen at the time.
Yeah, you guys definitely saw through the snake in the grass, and you had the foresight to say, hey, let's not continue on when we're not in a good space, because you want to
That's
make sure
right.
that everything is good, the relationship is good, because when you
That's
sign
right.
that record deal, you don't want to sign on the dotted line, be back at
That's
your
right.
mom's house, and then have to go down and
That's
fill out a
right.
UB40.
Exactly.
And that's how the band UB40 got its name.
Really, I didn't know that. I didn't know that at all. But
Yeah,
yeah, that's actually a
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah, that's how UB40 got their name, was for the form that
There you
was
go.
for unemployment over in the UK.
There you go. There you go. There you go. I knew of the form, but I didn't know that they actually. Yeah, I didn't think it was deliberate. It was a bit of a coincidence. With
Yeah,
ourselves, it's exactly that. It was risk versus reward. See, at the time, now by the time we'd split up, we'd had hit after hit after hit. We hadn't had one flop in the UK in terms of our singles. We had the clout, and we kind of achieved what we wanted to achieve. We actually achieved things that were way beyond what anyone had expected of a young black group in the UK at the time. So again, as I said before, a lot of group bands that came after us, Damage came after us, 3T came after us, Backstreet Boys came after us, Spice Girls came after us, but there was nothing like us before we came out. You know,
right,
we've really set that, really blazed that trail. There was absolutely
right,
nothing. If you track back,
right,
absolutely nothing happened before us.
right. But does
Yes,
it
sir.
kind of, gnaw at you a little bit that you guys had all the success in the UK, but you guys didn't really have the same effect over in the States, and you felt like Colombia could have done more to push you guys over in America?
Yes and no. Yes and no. That's a really good question. For us, when we went to America, so we went to the States, probably, I think it was around, we spent probably like a month there, initially in New York. We did all the magazines. You might have seen the Right magazine, and we went to Donny Iner's ranch, and we were launching the Bad Boys album out there. We got to do all those things and move about. And what we realized very quickly was that same massive roadshow run that we did when we were trying to launch ourselves in the UK, when we were performing for like a year to 6 months, traveling, doing 3 or 4 venues a day, visiting schools, doing every single interview we could get into, just getting our names, ourselves known, and blowing people over our performances. We couldn't go to America and overnight become a huge success. We realized we had to actually go and work it. We had to go and tour. I know, the American market is very, very, very complex. I suppose the analogy is that the first time we became aware of it was when we watched the movie The Five Heartbeats, when they had to get in a little van and they had to go to every single state and tour
Every
and
little
make the
mom
name
and
for
pop
themselves.
club,
That's the one.
a hole in the wall radio station. It's a
That's the
different
one.
it's a different beast over here in the States, and I probably
That
also
is
think maybe that's probably why Take That didn't really have success here in America, because Back for Good was their only US hit, because it takes a lot more work to come over here to America and really make it, because when you're an international act, you got your bullseye on America, because you could be big in France, you could be big in England,
that's
you could be big in Spain, but if you make it in America, America is where it's at, because you saw what happened to all the acts that came out of the second British invasion, from Spandau Ballet to Adam Ant to Duran Duran. When they got huge in America, their phenomenon went into Wham, George Michael, Phil Collins.
Yep. Exactly. That was exactly what it was. And that was actually in the pipeline. So that was the next thing. We were actually going to go to the States and live there for a while and actually make our name. That was the whole idea. But the things, we knew we had to get away from what we were doing in the UK and go over there and actually do it properly. But at the time, we were kind of like a bit of a wounded animal, like in terms of our own relationships with each other and what was happening with our contracts. We kind of thought, you know what? I don't think we have the stamina to do it right now. It's a risk versus reward thing, and there are other ways. I think obviously that was also you could say that the conditions they were based on also the technology. What was going on at the time. You see, again, let's just talk a little bit about Europe. One thing that hit me really hard was when I was a young kid growing up with my parents. I grew up in a relatively middle class background with my parents, and we'd go on holiday to Spain and Germany and Belgium and places like that when I was a kid. But half the countries in Europe, I'd only ever seen on TV. It's a stone's throw away from London, but you just an hour's flight away, and you're in a completely different land that's completely foreign. Now, for me, as soon as you drop, I've got something for you, because of MTV at the time, I was getting fan mail from places like Oslo and Norway, and places like Hungary and these Baltic states. And I was thinking, how do these people even know me? I didn't know these places kind of existed. I can't even fathom these places. And it was the power of the technology at the time. MTV was nuts in the 90s. Now, in terms of UK, there was a separation between MTV Europe and MTV the States. So MTV in the US. So obviously it wasn't easy to make that transition and that leap. But today you see things differently. You see a kid on TikTok in the UK will blow up in the US based on technology. So basically, I think a lot of the requirement to go and work the market and live there for a long time was based on the fact that we were still using that snail mail kind of approach and doing things very slowly. But the way the industry is now, you come up with a song like "Booed Up" by LMA, and it creates a buzz, and you can be on fire overnight, in every territory.
Right, definitely that, because once again, this was pre-internet, and this was when the world seemed a lot bigger, and then also marketing strategies were a lot different, because if you take a look at Backstreet Boys and NSYNC's international and US albums, same songs, but they just swapped a few out in order to appeal to what was going on over here in the US. So I think probably that same strategy would have been adopted by you guys had you guys decided to really do a full US run, which was to just make a couple of changes to where the album would be more R&B rap heavy. Because you guys had Diddy do one of his first remixes, so I definitely felt you guys probably would have fit perfectly on Bad Boy.
That's right. Well, the thing is, you're bang on right. We when we went to the States, I know Puffy was at the time. Puffy, they're calling him Diddy now. Puffy was really his nose was a bit out of joint that we didn't use his remix as the main single. There was also a situation where, and this is to tell you what was going on. This is to give you a hint at the frustrations within the label. And when we were releasing Happy, one of the cameos was by an upcoming rapper called Notorious B.I.G. when it was proposed, when it was proposed to the label in the UK to use this guy, they were like, "Who the hell is he? He's an unknown." And we were like, "This guy, you know,
You mean to tell
this
me
guy's
your
gonna be."
label turned down Biggie?
They turned down Biggie as a feature. Yep, they
What?
turned Biggie down.
Man, if
Yep,
you
they didn't
guys
know
would
who he
have had
was.
that, that would have exploded here in the US.
It'll be getting played now. Yeah, exactly. So that these are the kind of things that were going on. So you can understand for us, we were at a point at which we had to really, if I have to, if I was one word that summed up our whole time as M&A in the UK, it was compromise. We had to compromise all the way through because there were a lot of people that didn't. They were on this journey with us, but they didn't actually know what they needed to do. Whereas we had our ear to the ground. And when we
Right.
tell them these things, they say, "No, but you'll be too urban." I remember having full-on arguments with executives, and they'd say, "Look, you know, I know you want to do this, but it'll be too urban." That term they were using the term urban quite a lot back then. It would be too
Code
urban,
word for
and it will become
black.
too small. Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Let's call
And
it for what it is. Code
that was
word too black.
exactly. And the thing for me, what I was trying to say to them was that no, what we want to do is we want to build a career. We don't want to have just hit singles. You know, we were prepared as a group. We were prepared to have singles that didn't. Like Jodeci didn't always chart in the UK, but Jodeci can tour, can release in the UK now, and people will be interested. You understand? For us, we wanted to build a legacy of being able to just release songs wherever. You know, we weren't really concerned with having the hits, and we've even found today that the groups that didn't always go for the hits are the ones that still have the career. You know, and that's
Right.
what we were always interested in.
Right.
And so things like Notorious B.I.G., we saw that more as an investment. That would be an investment into us.
Yeah.
And
So,
but at the time, the label didn't really understand. They didn't really understand what was really
so,
going on.
so did you think it was because the people that were at the UK division of Columbia didn't understand what was going to work in the US market?
Well, yes, I mean to a certain extent. I've just lost the sound a little bit. Sorry, I just dropped out for a second. Sorry about that. Look, yeah. Can you hear me? Are you okay?
Yeah,
You
you're good. We're good. We're good.
okay? Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Now, to explain it properly, you know, in the US, when you have with me, I'm a voracious reader. You know, I've read everything. I read everything. And the one thing for me, I took a lot of time away after I left the UK, and you know, I read books about Quincy Jones, David Geffen. You know, those famous books that have all been out there. You know, and really soaked them up and absorbed them. And I tried to find parallels and lessons and learn things and make sense of what we were going through. And the one thing that really hit me with a lot of these artists, Frank Sinatra, you know, Tom Jones, he went to the US and blew up and all those kind of things. And what really hit me was that the people that were backing these artists within the labels were people who really knew. They didn't have to necessarily be black, but they were people who actually really knew and understood and loved the music that they were promoting. So in instances where you had people like Aretha Franklin, and you had A&R guys or people that really championed them, like Ahmet Erkan, and I can't remember the name of the dude who coined the term R&B. It was Ahmet Erkan, and I can't remember his name. It will come to mind later on.
Jerry Wexler.
And that's the one, Wexler, Jeffrey Wexler. Those guys were fanatics. I knew that Ahmet Erkan was the son of a diplomat, and when his father would travel around Europe, he would sneak out and go and watch the R&B singers sing in local theaters. You know, he loved it. He was a fanatic. So when it came to promoting stuff, he knew how to connect with people that were like himself. You know, that young kid of whatever background that really needed to hear that soulful sound that we had. Now, in terms of the UK, a lot of A&R people at the time, they were no longer legendary A&R people that were being hired by these labels. A lot of these people were people that might have studied a Bachelor of Economics at university in Scotland, and probably like listened to acts like Rolling Stones or Morrissey, and they were getting signed and being made A&R people in Sony, responsible for signing and marketing a black group. You know, and you know, that's just worlds apart. That's crazy. That'd be like, no, I'm a pastry chef, and I'm having to run like a haute cuisine restaurant. You know, a really sophisticated, high end restaurant. It doesn't make sense. I have to really understand the product before I can kind of have an input and promote it. So those are the kind of frustrations we would have. And what you often have in those instances when you have A&R guys who are not geared to that particular genre of music, they tend to make guesses, or they tend to look at what someone else is doing before they jump. They don't ever want to be the first person, because come come their financial review or their quarterly meeting, their butt's on the line, their job's on the line. You know, the dude who grew up listening to Rolling Stones, who's having to promote Mo Money, Mo Problems by Puff Daddy, if he makes a punt that he doesn't understand, he's going to lose his job. So those things were happening around us, and those are the little that's little machinery that people don't really see. Those are things that quite often dictate what happens to acts and what people see played on the radio and in the charts. You know, so a lot of decisions that were being made around M&8 were being made by people who didn't necessarily understand the depth of what we were doing and the
Right.
significance of what we were doing all the
Right.
time.
Right.
You know?
And I'm curious. Yeah, and I'm curious to know about this. I wanted to know if this was as prevalent in the UK as it was in America. It's still going on, but it's under another name. Was there any like payola going on to like BBC One, Capital One, where record pluggers would go in and bribe PDs to play records?
You know what? I've heard about that happening in the UK. I've heard about it happening a lot in the UK. I haven't really seen it, but I do know that people, how can I put it? If they have an interest in you, they will tend to, you'll get more airplay. Those things do happen, you know, but I don't know if it's necessarily payola. But I know that, you know, it's a bit clicky. Like, okay, for instance, when we were coming up, when we were looking to really break as M&8, I knew that us being successful as M&8, because we kind of came from nowhere. How can I put it? When we'd be touring, a lot of the acts we'd rub shoulders with were like, how come we didn't see you? How come we didn't see you guys come through the talent schools? Or how come we didn't know you moving in certain circles in Southeast London? How come we didn't know you? How can you come from nowhere and be so huge, right? It kind of put a few people's noses out of joint. You know how it goes.
Yeah, because you didn't come up
Sometimes
the traditional way.
didn't come up through them. Yeah. So we found, like, for instance, groups like Damage, who I actually love. I think it's really important what Damage. I think the work that Damage has done is a continuation of the work that we kind of started, but they're doing it in their own way and for their own audience. So I really have a lot of respect for those young guys. I haven't got an ill word to say about them. But we were quite mindful at the time that those guys were getting a lot more love underground than we were, because they moved with the right circles of people. You know, they had the underground labels on their side early, because they were a young R&B group. They knew what they wanted to do, and they weren't compromising in any way. They were doing really cool pop for their audience and their market. You know, really cool kind of like young R&B for their market. You know, whereas we were like trying to go great guns. We were trying to be, you know, Michael Jackson overnight. And it kind of like stirred people a little bit. So on certain radio stations, we couldn't get any airplay, you know? And so in terms of, you know, in terms of our own communities, they didn't often give us a lot of love initially. It reminded me a little bit of, like, even when you see, and this is just an out there analogy, but I remember Whitney Houston. One thing that surprised me about her career when I was, you know, watching a few documentaries and doing a bit of reading on her, I remember her, people saying that at the time when she was releasing songs like "I Want to Dance with Somebody," she wasn't getting a lot of love from the Black community, you know, at the time, because it wasn't all the way R&B. It wasn't ball tearing licks and runs and riffs, and it wasn't completely church. It was something that was slightly out there, and she would have superseded a lot of people who kind of people would have thought had paid their dues. You know, she was out there and she went above. She went over the top very quickly.
Right.
That was kind of with M&8. We did that in a way, and we came across very shiny and very, very clean cut, and we had a huge mainstream audience. Yeah, and we became huge stars overnight. I mean, to the point that, you know, I would walk down the street and I couldn't go into a local McDonald's. You know, I'd go into McDonald's and some guy from some far-flung country would go, "How can you be here? You're a superstar in my country." You know, whereas a lot of the local UK acts were just barely big in the local community. You know.
Right,
And
which is
those things were happening.
Which is crazy, because because I interviewed Narada Michael Walden, and we talked about how Whitney's music early on, it was getting played on R&B radio, but at the same time they felt it was too pop. But Clive Davis's whole intention was, hey, I want to make her cross over. And then when she went to the Soul Train Music Awards in 1989, she got booed when she got nominated for an award, because once again, the urban audience felt like your music was not catered for us. And I think because of that, that was why Clive Davis got Ellie and Babyface to do the "I'm Your Baby Tonight" album for.
That's right. And those are the next maneuvers that were to happen with M&8. But we got to the point where it was like, you know, risk versus reward. Do we really want to continue this journey? Things don't feel right, you know? You're exactly right. With ourselves, we were going over the top very quickly. You know, you understand, as I said before, for for any boy band at the time, black or white or anything, to have a top 10 debut single was huge. That hadn't been done before. Take That hadn't had a top 10 single straight away. They took a long time to have a top 10 single. M&8 went straight in at number 2.
Which is nuts
right?
for an unheard of
Which
group.
is, yeah, and we're talking about a time before streaming, before downloading. People were physically walking into shops and buying singles. So a black group was on the wall with posters in a young white kid's bedroom. So, their parents would never have even moved with people that looked like us. In some parts of England, they had never seen black people. See, in England, there's a concentration of black people that live. Yeah, in some parts of England, there's a concentration of black people that tends to be in London, in and around London, like within like a 25, 30 mile radius, right? When you go up north, you'll find black families and stuff, but they tend to be, a huge minority. So when we were doing what we were doing, I mean, it was unheard of. It was absolutely unheard of, and it went big guns. And also, a lot of these young black acts that we were coming up with, they were signed to a lot of independents, as I said before, small independent labels that knew an uncle could make some beats and had an uncle at a pirate radio station, and they thought they had it all sewed up. But when this group like us came out and we signed this $1 million deal and we were thrust out in the spotlight, we were on all your mainstream TV shows and your Saturday morning TV shows. It was like, how, these guys are sellouts, how can they've done it? Who have they done a deal with to become so huge? With us, and the sad thing for us is that we were never bitter about it. In our minds, we were going, we're doing this for you. So every time, so while we were out there, we were on the receiving end a lot of venues, we were actually quite mindful that, you're going to want to break it. And as soon as we're done, you're going to have a huge shot because we're creating this marketplace for you. We're doing it for us, but we're doing it for you.
Right, definitely that. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the impact that 5 Star has had, because 5 Star was huge in the UK, and they crossed over big time over here in America, and they kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of the urban UKs, like your Soul to Souls, your Loose Ends, your 52nd Street.
Well, you're bang on right. You're bang on right with 5 Star. I should actually give a nod to 5 Star. But in terms of being a boy band, an all black boy band, you see, with us black males, we can be quite threatening. And for what we did in terms of being what we were in the UK, it was huge. For 5 Star was something, 5 Star was very special. They were a very, very special act. And they were, and I'm going to give them a nod right here as well. They were a band that, in terms of the vision they had for themselves, was very similar to the vision M&8 had of themselves. They weren't trying to be the best black group in London. They were looking to take over the world, and that was the vision we had for ourselves.
Right. Right. And
it was
tell
like
me
that.
Right. Yeah. And tell me about your thoughts on Eternal, because I know you went on tour with Eternal, and Eternal was put together as the UK equivalent to En Vogue. They had a big hit with Stay, and Louise left the group after the first album. They were a 3-piece, and they did Angel of Mine before Monica recorded it again, made it an international smash. So what was it like seeing Eternal and seeing their huge success in the UK?
You know what? That is a really brilliant question. Now, Eternal were like our sisters, okay? Eternal were very, very close to us. So we spent a lot of time with Eternal before either of our acts blew up. So our production company was a production company called First Avenue Management. And First Avenue Management signed Eternal to their label, and they signed M&8. They were the first ones to pick us up. And it was run by 2 gentlemen. One was called Ollie Smallman, and one of his partners or whatever. And we were 2 acts in their camp. So we would be sitting there like how you have Mary J. Blige and Father MC. We were on their label. They were like the favorite child to First Avenue. They were the priority. They were looking to break them. They based them on a girl group in Australia called Girlfriend, and they wanted them to blow up and be the next big girl group. Now, the 2 older guys had been like fans of old Motown girl groups, like Supremes and
Martha Reeves
Supremes and Supremes, Martha, those kind of groups, and also the 3 Degrees who blew up in the UK. They wanted a sophisticated girl group that could do that doo-wop. They didn't necessarily want them to be like In Vogue, which was slightly more sexualized and had that whole look, but they wanted like a young kind of up and coming girl group. Esther, the lead singer of Eternal, had been like another singer, like Kule-T in my group. They'd kind of moved in that same kind of church circuit in South London. And so she was known to be able to blow. She was like a young Karen Wheeler type singer. And so the group was kind of based around her and her sister. And then Kelly was like from a talent school, and so was Louise. So they were like a precursor. They were like a very clean cut pop girl group. And we were like the bad boys who were signed to them. We were the guys that they didn't want us messing with the girls, you know. We were kind of out there, you know. You just have to look at an M&8 video and you know what we were like. We were hard to control.
Right.
And so yeah, they got the preferential treatment over us. So when it got to the point that when we were releasing, First Avenue hadn't held Eternal's hand the whole way. They really supported them and they did the right thing by them and they helped them out. But when we were with Sony, we had to kind of find our own way. You know, we didn't get a lot of support from First Avenue to break ourselves. Apart from we didn't get a lot of support. What we did was we hooked up with, I said, we've got our own manager. There's a guy called Ralph Daly. I'll give a massive nod to him. We lost Ralph Daly halfway through our campaigns. He obviously went on to other projects. He was a huge club promoter. He supported the massive hip hop concerts in the UK. He was affiliated with Pete Thomas in the States. He was responsible for most things that were happening that were all hip hop and New Jack Swing and R&B at the time. And he was a very regimented guy. He was like a real serious kind of like very religious man, very, very disciplined, well-educated, bit like Beyonce's dad, you know? He took that kind of view to M&8 and he said, look, guys, I'm going to partner with you guys. He goes, at this particular time, Mick Clark's sick, your head and air guy is sick. The way it's looking is you guys will probably be shelved. You guys probably won't even see the light of day, right? He said, what I want to do with you guys is I want to take you guys on the road and we're going to blow up huge. This is where you guys have got to be. You guys have got to be really regimented. You guys got to be practicing. You got to work on your craft. I'm gonna start moving to get the sound that you guys need. We got to work with a bad situation. You got a very poppy album, and as I said before, Ralph was the guy who was he was in the know. He had his ear close to the ground, you know. So he knew the urban scene. He knew what was expected of us from the black community in the UK. So he was trying to make best of a bad situation in terms of us being signed as a pop act. And trying to make it translate to them at the same time help us get to where we needed to be, you know. So Ralph was the guy who took us as an act from First Avenue and helped us blow up and become what we were, you know,
right.
in terms of our appeal and vision, you
right.
know. And him being a black man as well, he it wasn't lost on him. He was the A&R guy that we were kind of lacking, you know.
So now moving on to later in the mid-90s when pop in the UK was still blowing, did you think that the Spice Girls would have crossed over here in America, or did you think that they were just going to be huge in Europe only and not have the mega success like they did? Because they are the second biggest selling girl group of all time.
Spice Girls. I'll tell you a little story about Spice Girls. When I first met Spice Girls, they didn't have a record deal. They were living in a shared house in an area in Berkshire in the UK, slightly outside of London. I think it's like where Kate Middleton, Prince's wife, grew up, like a real leafy suburb. They were renting a shared house and they had this idea that they wanted to be the biggest group in the world. Very similar to M&8. They were kind of mad enough like us to want to do it as well. They didn't know many people. They just had their vision of being what they were to become. Now, me and Kule-T went to Sony one morning and we were sitting in Mick Clark's office. Mick Clark was the guy he was responsible for signing all these big acts. And he was sitting in his office and he said, KG, T, can you come in my office and check out this group? They're interested in being signed. I want to hear what you think of it. So I suppose it was his early idea. I think it was his kind of like piecemeal idea of a focus group. I think that was his style. Mick Clark would find an act and he'd field it to a lot of the young, maybe black or slightly in the know executives or people that he was around, see what they think before he made a decision. So he calls me and T in the office, and Mel B sitting in Mick Clark's chair, like really big and bold and braggadocious, feet up on the counter. Jerry's in the corner. Posh is like in the corner being cool and calm, and Baby's just in the corner being cute, right, and quiet to herself. And Jerry does the talking. Look, guys, I just want to say we're huge fans of M&8. We've seen what you guys have done. We see ourselves as somewhere between being like TLC and you guys. We see ourselves being out there like M&8, really bold, the way you guys take over TV stations, the way that you guys speak out, the way you guys perform big and brash. And we also want that cool that TLC has, but we want to give it that, and we want to give it our own feel. So, okay, cool. Do an a cappella. They sang a cappella. The girls were on point. a cappella. You could see they've done their work. They talked about their vision, and then they left the room. Mick Clark said to me, and he said, "What do you think of these girl groups?" And I said, "Look, you know what? These girls will either be the biggest thing you've ever seen, or they'll go nowhere," which is exactly how we viewed ourselves. We viewed ourselves with I've got something for you. When we put that song out, people were either going to hate it and it was going to bomb, or it was going to be the biggest thing ever, right? When these girls were going to come out, you could see from day one that they were either going to be huge, or they were just going to be ahead of their time and people would not know them. There was no doubt in my mind they were going to be huge, you know? Even when I saw that, and then I remember Mick Clark, he passed on it. He passed on signing them. I think he probably regretted that to this day. But then again, if I give him a little bit of a nod, he was the guy who's responsible for finding pure, slightly more. His leaning was more towards R&B and soul anyway. This was a pure pop group, you know.
Right.
So I think that may have led to why he thought maybe they were right for another label. That day. I think they went that day or the next day. They went to Virgin, and Virgin signed them on the spot.
And somewhere
And the rest is history.
Richard Branson is saying thank you for that huge
Yes.
mistake. And then also too that led a little man who wore certain shirts that became huge over here in America with American Idol, Simon Cowell, to create Five.
That's right. Well, the way, even going back to Richard Branson. Now, when I was touring with Janet Jackson, we toured like, I don't know, we must have done 20, 30 venues around Europe. Like, you know, we had this young group that was blowing up almost overnight, seemingly overnight in the UK, to playing to like 100,000 people in stadiums, walking around after Janet Jackson and blowing up the stage, you know? And we totally could cover a stage. We knew how we were prepared for it. We lived it. We loved it, right? And in the audience, next to my mom, she'd be sitting in the VIP section next to Richard Branson. If you're like, how come he's coming to your concerts all the time? You know, people like Richard Branson would be there. You know, Janet Jackson's mum and dad Janet Jackson's mother would come backstage to see us. The brothers would come and say, a lot of people were around us who could see where we were going and wanted us to be something. But Richard Branson showed a particular interest in us. He was a huge fan of our song, and he was looking for the next big act. He actually wanted to sign us. And I think he totally got that with Spice Girls. You know, he totally got that with Spice Girls. Like he invited us to. He launched the Eurostar. When he did that Eurostar, he launched a train that was traveling from the UK through to Paris, Disney World. It would go under the English Channel, under the sea, take it directly into Disney World. And he'd call us. We'd go on the train with him and his family. We'd launch those kind of campaigns with him. He showed a really keen interest. So it didn't surprise me that when they got signed to him, it didn't surprise me that he went that route. He was obviously he's got a keen eye. He knows. He's got a good eye for things. You know.
Right. He definitely has an eye for that, because with Five, they were huge in the UK. And then when the lights go out, the things you do get airplay over here in America. And I don't know if you know this little backstory about Five, but they passed up on a particular ditty that went to another boy group and became a huge hit for them, but they passed on it. You want to know what the song in the group was?
What was that?
Bye, bye, bye.
What was that?
Bye, bye, bye.
Okay. That doesn't surprise me too tough, though. That doesn't surprise me too tough. You know, the funny thing, though, I'm going to say this straight up. You know, when we were sitting in limbo after M&A, after we went, you know what, we're gonna take some time out to chill. I've done songs like Something For You and Freaky, and we passed up on songs like, you know, We Got It Going On, all those kind of things. We noticed after M&A, there were a whole bunch of boisterous young boy bands, you know, doing the whole beat down scene that Roots take the mick out of in what we do. You know, they're doing the whole. They totally took our vibe. You know, all those bands that came after us, all the European UK groups, they went from being Take That dancing in leather and lycra to being these R&B baggy pants boy bands like M&8. All of them overnight. I give a lot of kudos to them in terms of the energy. You have to do a lot of work to become successful at the back of it. But I also see that those groups wouldn't even exist if there wasn't a group like us out. They wouldn't have existed.
Right. And what was your take once grime and two-step started to explode, and then the rise of Craig David?
Yes. So around 99, I was doing a lot of writing. So after M&8, I got offered a solo deal to go and do my own album. And if you remember at the time, between the years of like 1998 to probably like about, even the early 2000s, 2000, 2003, M8 was R&B was in a really strange place. You know, we went through a place of having Jodeci early 90s, Jodeci and Boys to Men, you know, Kule-T High Harmony and all that stuff early 90s. Mid 90s, you had people like M&A. Then you had like artists like, you know, you had your Horace Browns and you had your Montel Jordans, and there was a lot of things happening. There were a lot of things happening. You know, you had the Jason's Lyric soundtrack, the You Will Know, the Tevin Campbells all blew up. Around 1998, 1999, everything became a little bit quiet. You know, neo soul started to really take off. You know, people like obviously I'd be on tour listening in 1995 to people like D'Angelo, 1994. I knew people who were developing them for years, and those acts were brilliant and awesome. But around 1998, all you had around that time, 97, 98, Maxwell, Eric Benet, R&B started taking on a particular look and feel. And it was really cool, really nice sound, but it was really kind of slightly chilled. It wasn't as boisterous. I think the only thing you really had around that time that was really out there was probably Drew Hill. Drew Hill came on the tail end of it all, and Drew Hill was like on fire. They kind of put it all together in their heads, and they were out there. You know, you had the whole Dragon thing, you had Cisco going nuts, right? That was what R&B was, but there wasn't much else that could happen. And at the time I got offered the solo deal by Sony, they called me up and they said, look, we're not going to continue with M&8. I got pulled up by Jed Doherty. He was the managing director of Sony. He said, look, I'm not going to continue with M&8. I'm going to, I want to do a cross-collateralization deal with yourself. You've been the front guy of the group for years and you're the sound of the group. I could just put you out without spending all that other money, right? But you know that whole saying that, you know, not all all money
that
is good
glitters
money,
is gold.
right? That's right. Not all money is good money. They weren't doing it for my own interests. You know, they were doing it to save money. And I just wasn't prepared to kind of like, I wasn't prepared to do something like that with the band. If you can offer me a solid deal, offer me a solid deal, right? But don't offer me a solid deal at the expense of the group. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that'd be shady, because I know a lot of US
Yes.
record labels, they have in contracts with groups where they have right of first refusal, where if anybody in the group decides to go solo, they automatically have the right to sign you to the label for a deal.
That's right. So for me, yeah, sign me, offer me a deal fair and square, but don't offer me a group and say you're going to end M&8, because M&8's its own animal, you know? M&8's its own entity, you know, and I'm not going to, all of us, I might have been the front person of M&8, but we all worked hard and we all deserve a spot, you know? I'm kind of a bit idealistic like that, you know? I'm not going to go out and try to become like a solo artist at the expense of everybody else, right? But so I decided, you know what, I kind of don't know what, and I also didn't know what I wanted to be like. See, for me as a solo artist, I love performing with the guys in M&8. It was always the dream. It was always the vision we had. As a solo artist, I could easily have gone off and done my albums, which I would be a fantastic solo artist. But in terms of the vision of what was happening at the time, I didn't want to come out and be dancing around on stage in 1999 when there was all this other rich music that was out there. You know, at a time when you've got artists like D'Angelo and Maxwell. Now, you know, you've got a time when I'm like early 20s now, and I'm a bit more mature as an artist. I'm creating some really amazing music with people like, you know, Joel Campbell and some really seasoned musicians. I didn't want to have to go out and continue singing pop songs by myself. You know, I thought that would be a really short-lived strategy. I became quite a known writer, quite a respected writer in the UK as well. So I signed to a label, EMI Chrysalis. And I began going and working with other artists and collaborating with other writers. And I wanted to kind of be a writer. And in my contract with Chrysalis were steps that would reward me once I recorded my solo album. So my publishing deal was with a view to releasing my own solo music. In that journey, I came across a demo of a young kid, and they said, you know, you might want to come and write for this guy. And his name was Craig David. And it was around 97, 98, I think, or 97, 98. And I heard this guy's stuff, and I just heard someone who was kind of ready. If you know what I mean? Like, you know, I kind of thought, and because I knew what we'd been through as M&8, we had our sound and we'd compromised so much. I heard a guy that you didn't really want to mess with too much, you know? I heard someone that, you know, you could put this guy out tomorrow, and I kind of...
He already had it.
Yeah, he had it. I'd only be doing it to try and make money, you know? And yeah, and I kind of said, you know, this guy's got a really cool sound. He had a really, in terms of his licks, he was always very tight. He was very neat. He had his own little sound. He had that little two-step vibe happening. And so when I saw him, I think within months, I said to one of the guys in the studio with us, look, this is that cat that we were looking at. And this guy had it. You know, he blew up and he did his thing, and I loved it. It was the music that we were listening to in the time in the UK. It was the whole vibe that we were into. I think Timbaland obviously had his own little take on that kind of choppy two-steppy thing, what he did with the Leo and everything off the back of that, or maybe at the same time or before. And it was a beautiful thing. It was a beautiful thing, and it was a continuation of that whole journey. I really was quite proud when I saw him come out and do what he did. I really thought it was really interesting.
Yeah,
I like the whole wave that came with it as well.
yeah, because I first heard of Craig David, MTV here in the States. They did a segment called "You Hear It First," breaking artists that you should know, and he was one of them. And
Yeah,
the
yeah,
single that they highlighted was "Rewind" that they did with Off of Dodger, my
that's right.
favorite cut off of Born to Do It. So I was extra happy once Born to Do It really was well received here in America. They shot
Yeah,
a
yeah.
US version of "Fill Me In." 7 Days was a big hit, and he did a
Uh-huh.
remix for that with
Yep.
Most Def, and I
Uh-huh.
think
Very smart.
Nate Dogg was on there, which was smart because it helped them break into the US market, and that album really exploded.
That's
Now,
right.
I would be remiss if we didn't go back a little bit to talk about the forefathers of modern day UK pop, Stock,
Uh-huh.
Aiken, and Waterman.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I remember those guys. I remember those guys back in the day. They were more so when I was like at the beginning of like high school. I kind of know them as being very poppy. Yeah, they're just really solid writers. They're just really good, solid songwriters of any genre of music. So obviously, when I was growing up, they were part of the soundtrack, but they weren't necessarily leaning towards all the time leaning towards R&B. They did things like The Princess and Say I'm Your Number One, and they did things for Rick Astley and a few others. But they were quintessentially just a pop, really solid, really good songwriters with a really
Yeah,
awesome pop sound and a machine behind them. So definitely,
yeah,
they definitely deserve a mention and a nod.
yeah.
I would go a little bit though. I will go a little bit more towards what you're saying about. Sorry to subtract a little. You mentioned about Craig David. I would say to you that again, I will say to you that about M&8. One thing about M&8, if again, what I said to you, you had groups like Five Star that were like brothers and sister, girl, girl boy group, reminiscent of the Jacksons. You had a girl group called Eternal, but before M&A in the UK, there was nothing like us that was urban, that was wearing Timberland boots, that was out there with boxer shorts, that was authentically about it, that had like the look and feel of us. And it was at a time where you had just white groups performing to white audiences. You had groups like Take That, or you had like East London groups like E17 that had a little bit of an edge to them, but they were essentially dance groups, a bit like Pet Shop Boys. They were managed by the same guys who did all the pop white groups. There was no room for a black group like us. And I remember early on in the piece, I remember being asked on BBC. They said, "Why do you guys think you're going to be successful?" And I said at the time, I said, "We're going to have to make room. We're going to have to, in marketing terms, sometimes, you're serving a marketplace, right? Sometimes you meet a marketplace because there's a requirement there, but sometimes you have to give people something that they need to have, and then they lap it up. You create something for people, and they come to you, right? So with M&A, we were looking to do that.
Right.
From us onwards, there was a snowball effect of groups that started to become urban and start to be accepted in the mainstream. When people see people that look like us, they accept the next act and the next act and the next act, and they get more leeway. When you tell me things about Craig David going to the States and doing certain remixes with certain people, those are things that are a possibility and that are really well accepted, and they'll get the dollars behind them. It's a brilliant idea because they can see the progression. It makes sense. But before that, it made absolutely no sense at all. Before we were in an absolute wasteland when we were signed. When we were signed, it was an absolute wasteland. We literally existed in a market full of white boy bands and techno groups. That was it, you know.
Right,
And
because
and so yeah, sorry,
yeah, because
you
I was
saying?
saying, when you're the first,
Hmm.
you pretty much get the brunt of everything. It's those that come after you that get to do what it is that you wanted to do, because like you stated, it was out at a time where there wasn't an urban UK group out. It was only Take That, Bras,
Yep,
E17, and there was no lane. You had to create your own lane, and those that
yep.
came after you get to sit down at the table and eat the meal that you guys prepared.
That's right. They didn't want to see people that look like us. There were magazines like Smash Hits that would put us on the front cover of the magazine. They wouldn't put us on the front cover. Even our executives in Sony, our Caucasian counterpart, our brothers and sisters who would fight for us, they'd go and say, "Look, MA's got the number one, the number top 10 single in the UK. They're the biggest group at the moment. Can they get on the front cover of the next edition?" And from high up within the magazine, they were told that black people don't sell magazines in the UK. You understand? So our job was to break down doors. Our job was purely breaking down doors. People had never seen someone like us before. And I'll give you an example of the impact that M&8 had. And it's unfortunate because if we had social media like we do today, and I was running around with a camera at the time, people's minds would have been blown. I remember being in Belgium. It would have been like April 1995. And we just performed at one of the biggest stadiums in Belgium. And we came out the door, and there were police guards. There were police with barricades and police dogs holding people back, and people were screaming at us. Remember, these kids only had any of us seen us on MTV, so we were their superstars, right? We came off. We were 4 black guys in 1995, and people are screaming at us of all backgrounds. White kids with blonde hair and blue eyes, right? Screaming at us. There was one black guy in the audience. One black guy, sorry, in the crowd outside at the back of the stadium, and he fought his way through to the front. And he said, "I just want to say to you that you make my life easier. You make my life better. People treat me really well because they see people like you on TV." He said, "You make me proud." Wow. And I remember that to this day. You understand? So you understand that so so the significance of what we were doing was so huge, but it wasn't being captured or documented.
Right.
It's something not to take very lightly. You understand? For a young black group from the UK to be on the front cover of Right On magazine and no one even know about it was absolutely huge because it didn't happen.
Right.
For us to be doing workshops with Prince Charles on the day of the Brits Awards in '95. Prince Charles, we were his favorite act at the time. He invited us to the coast of England to work with a bunch of disadvantaged youth, and we sat there with Prince Charles, a renowned musician and band leader called Jules Holland. He's really respected to this day. If you go online, you'll see Jules Holland work with people like Charlie Wilson, and from Charlie Wilson all the way through to Adele and a few other people. We sat down and did a workshop with him, and how we would work. We used to piece together a cappella music, and we brought a bunch of kids and we got them to do an a cappella with Jules Holland. Huge. Prince Charles was there, and we got to meet him with no cameras or anything. And he was really pleased that we did that without anyone knowing about those things. And it was at a day when we got to go to the prestigious Brits Awards, which was the biggest event in the UK. And we denied those to go out and help people. And no one gave us any kudos for those things. What we were doing was the beginning of the Prince's Trust. Wow. There was also an event called, and it's important I say these things because it also makes me a little bit sad when I hear us talk about a lot of acts that came after M&A. Because the one thing that serves a lot of people that came after us, and you'll notice it a lot. A lot of, say for instance, I come out and I become the next Cisco. In every interview, I'll never talk about Cisco. You understand? You understand? Like, you'll always think it was just me. Ariana Grande, it doesn't serve her to talk about Mariah Carey. Yeah? It has to be about, artists who are very popular, who are very similar to acts that came before, don't talk about the acts before. It's like they never existed.
Right. You definitely got to pay homage to those that came before you. Like new kids,
they don't
pay the acknowledgement to new edition.
That's right. You'll know. If I have to put it to you, my wife was in Australia. My wife works in media and in music. She was in Australia, and I was in the UK. This is before we were even. I don't even think we were dating. And she's an actress over in the UK. She's in a lot of US movies and stuff. And so she knows her way about. She knows a lot of bigwigs. She gets invited to a lot of exclusive places and events. And she was in Australia, and she went to a launch. I think it was I can't remember the name of the R&B artist, but there's an R&B artist who was touring over here, and she was promoting over here. I've got to get her name. She sings "Who Do You Love." She features Shanice Williams. Shanice Williams' husband dances in the video. Who do you love? If you really don't want me, who do you love? I can't remember the name of the artist. She's like a young Whitney Houston. My wife was backstage. She was talking to one of the executives, and the executive she mentioned to the executive that she knew me from M&8, and he said to her, he said, "Oh," he goes, "M&8." He said, "Yes." He said, "Do you know Backstreet Boys and NSYNC? They've ripped them off completely. We've designed it so they can be the next M&8. They can be the white version and reach a mass audience." The same story. Do you understand?
Yeah.
They were based on us. A lot of these guys, they were based by executives on M&8, but no one knows these stories. So what happens is we saw people take our formula and get given completely different treatment. And if I have to be honest with you, that was very disheartening. When we were looking to go forward, that decision we made to just sit back, that informed that decision for us not to push on. Because we were creating the groundwork. I'm going to say about 3T as well. 3T were amazing, like for what they were doing and their legacies. It's brilliant. But before us, there was no direction for a group like that. There were no braids. There was no backpack or nothing. You watch our video, Baby It's You, with the hairstyles and the way we looked, and the way we sounded, the way we looked. There was none of that. A lot of all the groups that came after M&8, we were the litmus test. We were it. Everyone got to build on that. But
Right.
the key is when you do it, don't say it was M&8, or people will still buy our records. They won't talk about you anymore. So nobody mentions us. So we could say we were pretty much screwed over by by fate. You know,
Right.
I wouldn't say it's anyone's fault, but literally we were the ones that people thought, you know, we can take what they've got, and no one will say anything. Everyone will just ride the wave with us, and that's what's happened. I said before, Spice Girls, no joke, Spice Girls sat there and told us we're the next you. We are the next you. Because I'm just saying, before Spice Girls, girls bands used to sit there all demure, you know, and quiet. These girls were trying to be us. If you ever know M&8, kids would tune into our TV shows because we would go on and we'd take over the set. You know, we were just ourselves. We'd go on set and we'd take over. We hosted Top of the Pops. We you know, people sometimes they used to dread because when we would improvise, we were just like that. We'd bounce off the walls. We had all the energy for days. And we were smart. We didn't do it in a really wild way. We were really smart and quite driven. And the idea was to present ourselves like lads. You know, we grew up playing football and eating fish and chips. So we resonated with a lot of people. We grew up with white kids, black kids. When people saw us on TV, they saw themselves in us.
Yeah,
we'd go on TV and just be ourselves.
You were the guys around the way. You could be at a park playing a football, or as we say here in the States, a soccer game, or like you said, a fish and chip stand. You guys were not cookie cutter, and you guys paved the way for a lot of acts like we mentioned earlier in the podcast, like Damage, like all of the urban acts that came after you guys. It is definitely, I feel, it's hard to see somebody taking what you're doing and reaping the rewards, but they're not giving you the proper credit. Say, hey, M&8 paved the way for us.
Well, let me explain something to you, even more so. Mobile Awards started around 1996.
Explain what Mobo is.
So it's a Music of Black Origin Award in the UK. I suppose it's probably the equivalent to like a BET Awards or an Essence type of awards kind of set up. It was to recognize music of Black origin in the UK. Obviously, there's a huge Afro-Caribbean and Black diaspora in the UK. Huge Black communities, huge Black influence in music in the UK, and you'll see it in everything from the music Sting plays for the Police, that whole reggae kind of influence, to things Jamiroquai was doing with soul, to the things that Simply Red were doing, you know, all the way through to Two-Step Garage and the whole thing. Now, the awards ceremony started in 1996. Who was the biggest Black act in 1996? M&8, right? When we came out, we launched the first Mobile Awards. We went on there with As Yet, and we performed at the very first Mobile Awards. It was on the back of a black hair show. And we came down, we were in the middle of our tour. We stopped off because we wanted to connect with our people. We stopped off and we performed there for nothing. And we went, as part of the award, we went back on tour. We were doing our road shows and all that other stuff. We stopped and we wanted to help out that award ceremony. That award ceremony has never, ever acknowledged M&8. And we believe a lot of it was to do with a lot of the politics was around it. The people that were looking out for us probably didn't get a lot with a lot of people who were organizing those events. The Music of Black Origin Awards has never, ever acknowledged M&8. You understand? I went to the awards ceremony in 1998 with my manager, and I sat down there and I watched them give awards to Jamiroquai, to Simply Red, to everybody. And there wasn't a nod to M&8, not even nominated. Now, most of the UK had never seen a Black act before they saw M&8. Had never liked a Black act before they saw M&8. You know, we were performing at Wembley Stadium. Just even the mere fact of just performing at Wembley Stadium, to get the success. For us to go and do that is significant to Black music. You understand? For us to make the waves we made, it was significant, but we were never acknowledged. And so those things were kind of wearing us down as well at the same time. You understand? And if I talk to you a little bit about Five, I remember sitting down with a writer called Brian Rawlings. He wrote for a group called Nightcrawlers. He wrote Do You Believe in Love After Life is Short, years later. And I sat down with him while I was writing. I bumped into him on a writing trip. I sat down in the studio. And he again told me, he said, I see Five on top and they're doing an M&8 impersonation. They're white kids acting like they're from the hood. With the fingers pointing, you know, and kicking in the screen, that electronic music, that high. But he goes, there was nothing like that before you lot. They're trying to be M&8. They know where the market is. Anything that was chanty like that was M&8, you know? All of it was
Right.
like that. The only group I can say that wasn't directly M&8 that came after us was probably a group like Another Level. They kind of tried to do it in a really kind of more authentic way. And I'd say even Damage tried to do it in their own way. But all these other pop tracks you saw, they without us, they would have been like other versions of Take That and Boyzone. At the time, our peers, when we started, our peers were people like Take That and Boyzone. When we were touring, the hugest groups at the time was M&8, Take That, Boyzone, and E17. We were one of 4 top groups, 4 boy bands. Understand? You know, sometimes there's an era of groups that are like the top ones, the ones that are that supersede everything else. It was Take That, Boyzone, M&8, and E17, and those were the only 4 groups on the scene. The only 4 groups on the scene. And when we would tour, E17 would come out to see us. Take That would come out to see us. Even when I was touring on Janet, Robbie Williams and Take That came to see us backstage. They were touring Germany at the same time. We were all amongst each other. But now the history books look like we didn't even exist.
But that just goes to show that those guys had to come pay their respect to say, hey, these brothers are bad.
That's right. Well, even Ronan Keating from Boyzone, Ronan Keating, he hosts a show over here called, I think he's X Factor. I think what's X Factor? Is it X Factor? I think it's X Factor. He's hosting over here. And a few people in production said, they didn't show this on air, but during the scene, he had a group and he said, look, let me tell you about one of the best groups I ever saw. There's a group called M&8 in the UK. They're one of the best live acts we ever saw. He goes, they used to close down every show and blow everybody away. Because we came with that stadium mentality, right? And he was talking about us like that on set, probably after about 2-3 years ago in Australia to people who didn't even know who we were. So we've become like a bit of a myth to a lot of people. But anyone who came to see us when we were young kids, we used to go on stage like we owned the place, and we rehearsed it that way. I mean, you got Details, who was like he was one of MC Hammer's dancers. He was an understudy for the New Power Generation for Prince. You know, you had G-Man, who was like, you know, G-Man performed like he was on steroids. You see the guy on stage, you know, the way he ripped off his shirt. He owned the stage like Bobby Brown, my prerogative. We were all about it. We were completely all about it. We had no regard, no respect for what came before. We were looking to take over completely, right? And so acts that we were up against, the little boy bands that were doing the little 2-step shuffles and stuff like that, they'd never seen anything like that before. They didn't know where to stand if it wasn't in the choreography. We were running across the stage. G-Man would be climbing up the scaffolding, you know? We were surfing the crowds. We would run into the crowd and perform from the back of the stage. You know, it was like a huge hip-hop concert. And for us, before M&8, we were those kids that were selling the concerts at like Onyx concerts and stage dive. You know, we were those guys. That's what we would do by night. We'd finish recording and go to an Onyx concert in the middle of London and be slamming everybody. We were those kind of kids. And when you took that and you packaged it up and you made it into a boy band, you had something that was completely different, you know?
Yep. You guys took the urban flavor and exploded it to the pop world, and they didn't know what to do with you all.
That's right. But young white kids who, and I hate using the term white and black because obviously it's annoying, particularly now. And it actually can be, to a certain extent, slightly counterproductive. But young kids that were of different backgrounds who were watching us, young white kids, they were no longer now informed by people like Take That. They didn't have to dress up in lycra and spandex and leather and dance on stage and try to appeal to, like, you know, our slightly more LGBTQ audiences or young girls and grandmas. They could actually just go out and be as boisterous as they wanted to be, you know. And for those kids, they saw an outlet in us, you know. Those young white kids who like to spin on their head on a piece of vinyl, or who like to listen to LL Cool J, or they like listening to New Edition. When they saw M&8, they saw themselves. And off the back of that, you saw groups like Five come out of nowhere. These young rapping groups, they would never have been signed before, you know. People used to shame white kids into not accepting black culture.
Right. It was almost like a dirty little secret where I got to have my Take That record up in the front and not have to have the M&8 or the Jodeci record, so that my mom and dad can see me looking at something on Top of the Pops or not a U.S. import of an urban music show.
That's right. And as you know as well, opposites attract as well. So, like, you know, a young Caucasian girl who you know, she likes seeing the white boy bands, but like sometimes people like the opposites of what they look like. Or sometimes they have a friend that they grew up with that looks like you, and they don't understand why they're not seeing your representation. But they saw bands like ourselves, they saw a little bit of themselves, or they saw a little bit of something they liked. You know, a lot of the kids I grew up with, when I was like 13, 14 years old, I was going to school with young white and black kids, and young white girls were going to see Bobby Brown the same way you see girls going to see Justin Bieber now. So you understand that an act like that was lacking in the UK until M&8 came along. We were that, you know, we were that.
Yeah, because I know,
and also, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, because I was saying a lot of, when a lot of the UK acts made it big in the US, it was almost like they were surprised at all the reception that they were getting over here, because urban music, of course, over here is the bedrock of pretty much everything: rock, blues, all derivatives of R&B. So it was like, wow, you mean to tell me that there's a station that plays nothing but R&B and rap all day, all night, and I don't have to listen to it by a certain time before the FCC comes and shut it down?
Exactly. Well, you understand this as well, even like for ourselves as well. As young black people, I think there's a few different crossovers here. So we're talking about, even for young black people like M8, who we were. When I talk about our success, and I talk about people like Five success, for me, and I'm just going to say it straight up, I think Five success has a lot to do with privilege as well. These guys didn't have to be R&B or you could. I personally think you could get any five white guys, put them in a room. If they look half good looking, half decent good looking, teach them a dance routine, give them a boisterous track, they're going to blow up, right? It's very different with a black group. Very different with a black group, because you've got everybody fighting you on all sides. Yeah, you've got radio stations that won't play you, and you've got the urban stations that won't play you. You know, literally, it shouldn't happen, right? It's literally the rule of it. It doesn't happen. So you have to do what Michael Jackson did. You have to be twice as good as the Osmonds just to get the same. You know, so I don't look at a lot of that like, oh wow, I'm impressed by the success. I can see when people have worked really, really hard. Groups like that I see, like Backstreet Boys, are significant because I think they're actually really talented. You know, groups like Five have their talents, but I know that was also the brainchild of music executives who wanted to emulate what M&8 had. It's not the guys' fault. The guys in Five are probably quite talented, but I see it as being a brainchild of an executive or a honcho who thought, wait a second, we can create another M&8, but one that actually, meets the mainstream audience a little bit better. But for me, when I look at these groups, I don't see them in the same space as M&8. I don't see them at all in the same space as M&8. Even something completely different. But I see them as having benefited a lot. I think today, you'll see even today, we look at groups like, we look at people like I said Ariana Grande. Ariana Grande, when she had that first song out, I Like the Way, that sounded like something Mariah Carey would have dropped in the 90s, right? And if Mariah Carey hadn't dropped it in the 90s, I don't believe that you would have an Ariana Grande record. It's that kind of thing. It's kind of like, well, if you see people like Amy Winehouse, she was really talented for days, but her stuff to me was very reminiscent of what Lauryn Hill was doing. You understand? It's very reminiscent of what Lauryn Hill was doing. And this is significant. So we can say, oh, okay, Lauryn Hill was very successful, but I think it was hugely significant that Lauryn Hill, looking the way she was, and looking at it in context with history, and looking at what was around before her success is very different to Amy Winehouse's success. It's just two different things. It's significant for anyone to, I said before, not taking anything away from those other acts that came subsequent to us and what they've done, black, white, brown, whatever. But it's a very different type of success that you enjoy.
Yeah,
very different type of success.
Definitely that when you definitely got the big machine backing you, like your Ed Sheerans, your Adeles, your Sam Smiths, where they're transatlantic superstars. I mean, it was a big controversy here in America when Adele won Album of the Year for the Grammys over Beyonce's Lemonade.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say to you. And where are we going with this? And I'm going to say this straight up. We're not talking about, well, it might be. I don't know. I can't read the minds of other people, right? But I think we're not talking about racism. I think we're talking about something else here. Like for me, one of the things I did when I moved to Australia was I went and studied marketing. I went and studied for years. It was something that made sense of a lot of things that we happened to do ourselves. So quite often when I was in M&8, we were running the show. We were doing our branding, and I created the first M&8 logo. I was the one who came up with the idea for the campaign for the boxer shorts. I was a natural for those kind of things. Those kind of things that you see, the people making merchandise. Those are things that I was doing, and I'm going to give comments right now. I based that idea on what New Kids on the Block were doing in terms of their merchandise. New Kids on the Block's merchandising, I think New Kids on the Block made more money from merchandising than they did from their music initially. So my idea was, okay, wait a second, we're always wearing our pants sagging. Why are we going to write Calvin Klein? Why are we going to wear Calvin Klein's boxer shorts? Let's create our own. People are going to want to be like us. And that was the whole idea. But anyway, marketing was always a thing in the back of my mind. So when I came to Australia, I went and studied marketing for many, many years and got involved in the music industry in different capacities. And the one thing that really resonated with me then and resonates with me now even more so was that people, they let me just go off a little bit. Let me just stretch it a little bit. Let's look at things like even phenomenons that have spawned since M&8 and boy bands in the 90s. Things like mixed martial arts and UFC. You look at phenomenons like Conor McGregor, right? His whole appeal is he resonates with anyone that looks like him. Anyone that looks like him or hails from where he came from. And it's not racism. It's not about hatred for black people or anyone else. It's just that young white people can see themselves in him. You know, when you see somebody who's like you doing what you're doing, and they're doing what you wish you could do, they become like a superhero and you back it. Now, when you see people like Adele and you see people like Beyonce, most of the Western world that we live in, and literally we live in a Western Caucasian environment, and you see every day, every video you see, every second video you see on Twitter of black people being marginalized, or it's a stark realization that black people are a minority in the West, and we know the story. I'm not even going to go into it, but most people look like Adele, and that's all they want. They want people who look like themselves. And what's happening with music, particularly in the UK right now, is the face of things like R&B. I'm going to simplify it. I'm going to really simplify it and dumb it down. In the 90s and 80s, black people were known for being excellent singers, weren't we? We were known for, like, you know, you'd have your like, I'd be watching like the Apollo. I'd be watching people like Anthony Bailey and some of the featured artists like Glenn Jones and Tony Terry. Black people were known for being amazing singers. In today's society, black people are rappers. Black people talk over beats, and white people are singing R&B. You understand? The market has backed white people as singers, and the market has accepted black people as being rappers. Trapeze soul stars who half sing and murmur over beats, right? All the great singers today, Adele, Ariana Grande, Jessie J, you know, where are our new Faith Evans? Where's our new Luther Vandross? You know, where's the support for those kind of things? And it's so easy to call it racism. It's not racism. It's just the fact that people resonate with people who look like themselves. That is it. That is it. Period. You know. And if I reverse it and I want to make it look like, okay, it's not about white people. We love seeing people like again, let me look at boxing or martial arts. We love seeing people like John Jones and Anderson Silva as black people because we see ourselves in them. We love seeing Obama because we see ourselves in them. You know, not to the point that we're going to begrudge our white brothers and sisters, but we like seeing people like ourselves. And I think that dictates a lot of what we're seeing in the marketplace in terms of music. You know,
yeah,
and it's an unfortunate thing that we have to navigate.
Yeah, I definitely agree that is unfortunate that we still look at everything as black and white. And then before we continue with the podcast, I definitely want to say, as a African American male here in the US, to see the world stand with us after George Floyd being killed, it just brings me to where I'm not invisible. The world says we stand with you, America. To see John Boyega and everybody over in England and worldwide stand with us and say Black Lives Matter. I just got to say it is just, for me as an African American male in the US, it's heartwarming to see.
Can I say something to you as well?
Go ahead.
You know, when
Go ahead.
we talked a little bit about the beginning of R&B and music and stuff like that. The reason why, as M&8, we didn't really see a distinction between what was happening in the States and what we were seeing in ourselves as young black men in the UK. If you understand the way, you know, the same journey that African American people have been on, the same people of Caribbean descent have been on the same journey. We actually probably come from the same parts of Africa. We've been through the same system of slavery, right? And we just ended up in the islands, right? Our parents decided in the 1950s, instead of going to the US, we decided to go to the UK and Canada and places like that. But the same journey and the same experience, the experience is exactly the same. And the origins of the music is the same. You know, you look at people like Kool Herc. Kool Herc was a Jamaican guy in New York City at the beginning of rap music. And a lot of like what you see in terms of rapping over beats and MCing came from Jamaica, you know, came from ragga and dancehall music. So what you're actually seeing in the UK and in places in the UK, we see black groups spawn up. It's coming from exactly the same place it's coming from the UK in terms of R&B and music, swing and stuff like that. That's why you see the same kind of talent coming from overseas. We're on the same journey with the same people, you know. In terms of in terms of that's why I say to you, like, sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect. I remember talking to one of my buddies in the States. There was a group in the UK, they were called Big Bro or whatever, and they were rapping in American, and he was going, "Look, you guys are copying our culture." And I said, "Well, you can't really say it like that, because at the end of the day, hip hop culture came from a lot of Jamaican people, you know, but people from the same. You go to Jamaica, you'll see it, the same things there. We were doing it from a long time ago. It's the same people doing the same thing, same journey, same genetics, everything, right? When you see things like what happens, I'm going to jump a little bit. When you see things like what's happened to George Floyd in America, that resonates in the UK because white people grew up with friends at school. Well, it might be slightly different to what happens in America. A lot of white kids in the UK grew up with friends who look exactly like George Floyd. That was someone's first boyfriend or someone's best friend, or that was someone they played on the football team with or whatever. And they see it and it's like, nah, this won't fly. There's also, I found, with a lot of people, and that obviously jumping into Australia as well, another journey. But for a lot of people as well, these are people who would wince on social media about someone harming a dog. They see that someone do that to another man. I think it was very grounding. They couldn't escape from it, and that's when you have to confront your own humanity. And I think for a lot of people everywhere, I think it made people realize that we're all people. We're just people first. We are just people first. And I think that's what's resonated about this whole thing with George Floyd. We talk about police reform, we talk about racism. Racism's there, but it's more about shared humanity. I think those moments like that make people see, wait a second, we're better than this. All of us are better than this, And there's a common thread between all of us,
Right. We're definitely all one and the same. And
that's right.
I want to mention, you're in Australia. We got to talk about, with the Aborigines.
Yes. The Aboriginal situation is very similar. The Aboriginal situation is very complex over here. Very, very complex over here, and it's a very similar thing. These guys are very in a very dissimilar way to what we've been through in the West, in the States and America and UK and the Caribbean. The Aborigines are the original people here. They're not the imports. They weren't brought here through slavery. They're not immigrants or anything. They're the people who originally owned the land. And through some unjust treatment that happened, 200-300 years ago, they were pretty much like what Columbus did to the Indians in America. That's what happened here. And so it's extremely complex and extremely deep, These people are the real Australians. The hard thing about it for me as a black man is that if a black man, in terms of our definition from people who came from, I'm going to use the word, people who came from people who hail from Africa, is that in Australia, they tend to look at anybody who's dark-skinned as being black, which betrays our own individual stories. You understand? A lot of Aborigines over here don't have any African DNA at all, right? A lot of their DNA comes from places like India and Southeast Asia, and so their experience is the same. The unjust treatment they've experienced is the same, but it's different. There isn't. Right. They do have a slight legacy of slavery that did exist, and I think it would have been informed by what was happening to us in the West, us being exported from West Africa. But it's slightly different and nuanced. So it's a different thing altogether. And I've quite seen situations over in here where I suppose you could probably equate it to what's happening in the States when you see people with a Pacific Islander background who seem to be black in appearance, but they're slightly different. It's that kind of thing, It's the same but different. It's unjust, it's horrible, but it's different. And I think that people now are beginning to pay a lot more respect to Aborigines over here because they're starting to be well aware and more informed that they're the original people of this land. So I think it's slowly happening for them. But in terms of black people from Africa, I feel like we're kind of always seen as the outsider.
Right.
And I notice that here more than ever. It's a different type of racism, It's a difficult one.
Yeah, I can definitely agree because I'm originally from North Carolina in the U.S. and I moved out to New Mexico about 6 years ago where my wife is from. She's black and we're in a part of the state where it's predominantly Native American. We're close to the Navajo Nation reservation. So to see up close, where running water is a luxury. You have generations of family members living in one house and you have to drive X amount of miles out just to go get running water, food deserts. Not good. And to see it up close, it just made me realize, like, man, Black people and natives stories are very similar, and you like you said yourself, I think everybody is waking up to the fact that, hey, this has gone on enough for far too long. And the next generation, the youth that's out now, because they're the social media generation where everything is at the palm of their hands or at the click of a mouse, they're sick and tired of it, and they're not going to stand for it.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's a funny thing. I think race is a very, very important and poignant thing. And the thing is, it's been so hard for us to have that conversation without people getting defensive and feeling like we're accusing them of something. You know, it's a strange one. I'd often say to my wife, like, people get offended because I've pointed out that they've offended me. You know, that used to happen a lot in Australia. I'd come over here and someone would bring up the fact of my color or whatever, and I'd say, hey mate, like, you know, chill out a little bit, and that person would be offended because they feel like I'm calling them a racist. So they feel like what they were saying to me was nothing compared to being called a racist. But the thing is, they raised the agenda, you know, and those kind of things happen a lot, and that kind of thing happening kind of everywhere has made race a really difficult conversation. I see it in the States all the time. The whole thing about the lost in translation message of Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. You know, it's a very logical message when Black people say Black Lives Matter. You know, do we have to add two on the end of it? You know, Black Lives Matter too. We shouldn't have to do that. People understand the reason why that's around is because Black Lives Matter because all lives matter. You know what I mean? And it's funny to me that people don't really understand that. And it's because there's a defense mechanism that people have, but they don't want to give up what they have, or they don't want to feel like they're in the wrong. They get defensive about things, and it stops conversations from happening in the first place. In context with bringing it back to music, in context with music, what it does is it stifles the fact that there are certain things that aren't happening. I saw Jermaine Dupri mention the other day that they got rid of the term urban music in America. I think it was in awards categories or whatever, because it was classifying black music in a certain way. If you notice, there wasn't an R&B awards in America for many years at the Grammy, right? And this conversation about color and race, it colors everything at a deep level, and because no one can speak about it, it can never ever be addressed. You understand? It just continues and continues and continues. And I think that's that. If I bring it back to this conversation, it's why I touched on it quite a bit in this conversation we're having. You know, a lot of what you see, a lot of the legacy of what you see with M&8, a lot of what was happening around us, a lot of what you see happening in music today, there's an unspoken kind of agreement or an unspoken kind of acceptance of the way things things being the way they are, and that's why we're seeing things go the way they're going. You know, and that's why we see many of the acts we see today, and much of the success that we're seeing. Adele winning awards at things as a Beyonce or who was it winning the hip hop award? I think J. Cole was commenting about someone winning the hip hop award. I can't remember who it was. It wasn't Post Malone, or someone was winning all the hip hop awards. These things are happening. Yeah, Macklemore. It was Macklemore. That's right. And it's almost like we're being gaslighted because no one raises it, right? And a lot of black people are scared to raise it because they're scared of losing their support base and their marketing goals or whatever. I don't know what it is by calling it out, but it is a real thing. And I do agree that it is unjust to call the people doing it racist, because they're not racist. It's a really lazy term to call people racist, but it's nuanced. It's like, you know, if I give you another analogy of being in Australia and how everything's slightly separated, one thing that's become really apparent to me, and I speak to a lot of people from Chinese communities here, a lot of people from Greek communities and South American communities. My wife herself, her family is from Argentina, she's Argentinian, and they only want to deal with people in their own community. You know, my wife grew up loving Janet Jackson, but she loves Jennifer Lopez more because Jennifer Lopez resonates with her. She can see herself in Jennifer Lopez. You know, the Asian community. I've got a few business partners and associates who are from China, and they like, you know, we only want to deal with Chinese people. We're not prejudiced towards anyone else, but we are biased. You understand? It's not somebody hating on you. It's just the fact that certain privileges are rewarded in certain communities. In the West, where we inhabit, where we live, it's predominantly white and young white girls. They turn on TV and they want to see people look like themselves. So you understand that certain, you know, the audience will go where that message is, you know, and that's what makes it all poignant. But because it's an unspoken, no one is ever going to address it, you know. But the moment if I hark back a little bit, it sounds really damning and negative what I'm saying. But if I hark back a little bit, the answer to it is something that's very, very different. And the answer is representation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, Black artists, they need to present themselves not as Black artists, but just as human beings, as who they are, right?
Right.
People like us, right? Or people like yourself. You every day you wake up in the morning, you don't wake up thinking I'm a black man, do you? You wake up in the morning and you want to drink water, you want to go brush your teeth and have breakfast and pat your dog, you know? You're a human being, right? You're only reminded that you're a black person when you watch the news or someone tells you you're black. But other than that, you're a human being, you're a force of nature, right? We're all forces of nature. Now, in the 80s, I'm jumping a little bit because that's the way I speak. I sound like the nutty professor of Back to the Future. but in the 80s, artists like Michael Jackson, they weren't a thing. They were a force of nature. When white kids turned on the TV and they saw Michael Jackson, they saw themselves. Not just because he paled his skin. They saw him when they were watching Thriller and Billie Jean, you know? Because he presented himself as a force of nature. He represented his music. He was out there. He wasn't over familiar. There was mystique there. But this guy was so amazing. It spoke to them on so many different levels. I could say to you that maybe someone like Obama does that as well. He connects with people on so many different levels that people love him to this day. You know, where people might have not thought he was the most fantastic president. People think he's an amazing guy. You know, they see themselves in that. Artists like Diana Ross or people like Sammy Davis Jr. You know, they were amazing forces of nature, and they people came out of the civil rights movement, and they saw the significance of being the way they were, and they saw the opportunity that was ahead of them. So they just went out there and they ran with it, and they became who they were. You know, today in music, I don't see that anymore. I don't see people trying to be great anymore. I see people trying to be parochial. I see people coming out and having rap groups. I see black people running around calling each other, and it's controversial. It's calling themselves things like the N-word, right? I'm going to say the N-word because I don't look at my black father and call him and think he could be that. You know, I don't look at Barack Obama and think he could be that. I don't look at you and think you could be that. For me calling you that is like a white person calling you that. It's in my head, you know. I see myself as a proud Jamaican lion, right? That's the way I see it, right? And there's a proud heritage that went through it. So today, I don't call black people, it's like calling you a lowlife or a loser, right? Unfortunately, this is the thing. What people in America don't understand is when you look at the rest of the world, people in China and England and Europe and Germany, we didn't grow up hearing the N-word. We've heard it all through rap music. It's been promoted to us, like McDonald's. There are people I grew up with that never heard the N-word in their lives, but they hear it now on radio. And so they know to point at me and use it. So our culture has been proliferating things negative. So we've been beating our heads over this. We're beating ourselves over our head with the stick that oppressors gave to us for years in media, and it's being backed by multinational organizations that consist of people who have money, and these people don't look like us. These people think, hey, that's what the people want. We'll back that. We'll put that record on radio, and we'll just slightly mute that. Words like ignorant is being proliferated throughout media. It's hate speech about ourselves, to ourselves, and to white people who don't know anything about it. We're doing these things that are really negative and damning to our culture. Michael Jackson never used those words. You know, Prince never used those words about himself public in music. So what I'm trying to say to you is representation is the answer to it all. You know, we've got to go out there and do what we are.
Right, you know? And this was why. Yeah, and this was why Motown was so successful in the 60s, because Berry Gordy knew that, hey, there's not going to be anybody that looks like you performing in these places, going on these shows. So you're going to have to be more than, because nobody has seen anybody like you. Be the best self that you can be, to where when somebody looks at you, they don't see you as, oh, you're black first. They just look at you as a person. And also, too, for me as an American, it's interesting to hear the perspectives of people from other countries saying how they view Black Americans through the lens from their own country. Because if you go to certain countries, they look at blackface as a sign of endearment to black folks, where for us, if somebody were to come to me in blackface, I would be like how Mel B was when she went to, I think, Denmark, and they had this tradition that they just recently stopped called Black Pete. And and she was saying, no, this is racist. This is offensive to me as a Black woman.
Definitely. Yes. Definitely. Yes, exactly. Look, it's these things. I said before, they're an invisible hand that's behind everything we see. And when I talk about it in relation to music, I'm not saying, oh, it's really bad for us as black people. We can never get on and whatever. I mean, like, where are our Whitney Houston and where are our Michael Jackson and where are our Luther Vandrosses? Where's the continuation of Tevin Campbell's career? He could have been a great. Where are our artists that are like that, representing themselves as artists and putting themselves out there? You don't have to be clean living or any of that nonsense that we have to do to kind of like switch up code and make people look like we're integrated. Forget that. I'm talking about where are we showing our greatness? Instead, I turn on the TV and I'm seeing. I'll listen to an R&B track that I really enjoy. But in the second line, someone's saying the N word. You understand? And it's like, wait a second, no. You understand what I'm talking about? Um, let's just talk about the gay community, for instance, right? And I mean this really respectfully. The gay community, they don't speak of themselves like that publicly. They don't make songs and they don't use like the profanity that remember in the 90s we used to hear lots of profanity in hip hop records about gay people using the F word and that like to describe gay people. Gay people don't use that terminology to describe themselves publicly and in media. They don't, because you're keeping it alive by changing the spelling of one of the letters. It's still the word because it still derives from the same place and it's still linked to the same thing. It's still intertextual. You know what I mean? And for some reason, there's this whole thing where we're kind of backing ourselves on it. Like, hey, we're going to use it, and it means that we're owning the word. And you know what? Don't use the word, and let the people who want to use the word expose themselves, so you know what you're dealing with. You know, let the people who want to use that word expose themselves, so you know what you're dealing with, and you let them know that word's off limits.
Yeah, I
We're kings and
definitely
queens.
agree with that.
We're kings and queens, all the way through. And I mean that in the way that we're all God's creation. And I have the same respect for black people I have for white people too. We're all God's creation. To be honest with you, I am at a point where I don't, I'm not going to say I don't see color, but I see people as just people. We're human beings. We've all got this opportunity we've all got this opportunity. And we don't know what we were before, where we go, or what happens afterwards. I grew up in a strict Jehovah's Witness background, right? So I'm strictly religious. So I'm not a Jehovah's Witness anymore, but I do have that Christian morality. So I have a lot of respect for those teachings. But for me, I'm open to a lot of other things, and I don't know where we go or where we were before. But in some faiths, they believe that we were something else before we came here, and we might go on to be something else later on. I don't believe the color defines you. We're forces of nature. We have one shot on this planet to learn or do whatever we need to do, and then we're on to the next. It might just be an experience. We might die and there's nothing after. We might go on to someplace else. But what we've got this huge opportunity to enjoy and laugh at this experience that we're having, right? Whatever it is, we just got in. For me and you, we just got into a particular dodgem car that happens to be black or blue or red or whatever. But we're still the same people within it. We're wearing this suit and we're having this experience in life,
Right.
So I look at race in that way, but I'm also wise to understand that some people only see things heuristically. They see things on face value, and someone who's Italian will want to deal with Italian people in a particular area. They'll lean more towards listening to an Italian tenor as opposed to listening to an Irish tenor. You know what I mean? When it comes to opera, but when it comes to pop music and black music, historically we've always seen the whitewashing of our music. We've always seen the Elvises pop up after you have your Little Richards and there's a bevy of other artists. But you know what I'm talking about? It's a historic thing. It'd be silly to ignore history and think that doesn't happen. And
Yeah.
if I have to explain it, for M&8, we're all well aware that that's been our legacy for us. The music industry hums along in the UK and they don't speak about us, and it's almost convenient. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah,
That
makes perfect sense. And also I want to bring up George Michael. He had did a documentary before he passed that aired on Showtime here in the States. And it was saying how once Faith blew up, it got airplay not only on pop radio here in America, but on R&B radio. He was heavily in rotation on Video Soul, BET, and he won 2 American Music Awards for Best R&B Album and Best Male R&B Artist. And there was a big backlash over here in America because some people felt like, hey, we love George Michael, we love his stuff with Wham, but when he's winning our quote unquote categories, then that's a problem.
That's right. That's bang on the money. I'm going to try and bring it back in context of what we were talking about with the Black Lives Matter and whatever, and the police reform and stuff. And in line with what you were just saying, and it's important to note that there is a I won't say a racial, there's an identity element. I was reading about a policeman in the States just yesterday. I think I was talking to my young daughter about it. She's obviously mixed heritage. She's 16 years old, and she's understanding things a little bit more about what's going on in the world. As I said before, I'm just raising people here, but my daughter starts to ask questions. I'm showing her things. And there was a policeman, he was explaining police brutality in America, and it was a black policeman. And he was saying that, from his experience, he said, probably like 5% of police are racist. They're out and out racist bigots. Not all police are racist. Probably like 5%, a small element, are absolutely out and out racist. They hate the ground we walk on, right? That probably happens everywhere in society, everything. He said then there's probably about a 25% that are really good cops. Really good cops. They wanna join the police because they want to make a difference. They want to help grannies get cats out of trees and walk across the street and whatnot. They want to serve the community and look after people. 25% are really good Serpico type cops, right? Then he said that there's a 70% of police that are just inert. They're just they're cops. It's your job. You go there and you're a cop. And depending on what type of leadership you have, that day you'll either make decisions to carry out to conduct police brutality or stop it. Depending on what your leadership is. If you have a chief who's a racist, a bigot, that'll be the culture of your particular police force, right? And if you have a chief who tends to be about bettering the world and being good and being and about equity and equality, your force will then lean towards that way in the way that they conduct the day-to-day. There'll be more community-based, more caring. What he was saying is a 70% of people that are inert. That is how I view the people who buy music, right? They are not necessarily racist, and it's a horrible accusation to just dumb someone down and call them racist or homophobic or whatever you want to call them, label people in a certain way without really knowing where things are coming from. It's really frustrating for the person who you're saying it to. But depending on which way things are kind of moving, they tend to be informed by it. You know what I mean? So when you see a George Michael come out, someone will make a decision to buy George Michael over going and seeing Trent D'Arby, or they'll buy over their Michael Jackson record, not because they're racist, because they have that particular leaning, the way it's fed to them through the media, or even having access to it will lead to why they choose to consume that type of media, and that's what's happening with music in general. The way that it's marketed and it leans towards that kind of mass mainstream Caucasian record buying middle class audience. It's just sold to them that way. And if you can sell to that audience, you've gone clear. The record industry tends to be led by people who look like you walk into a record company. Most people don't look like you and I in a record label. Probably a little division, unless it's an independent or a hip hop label. Most people don't look like us in a lot of these mainstream record labels. And they're the ones who are setting the tone for what's happening. And when that stuff's being put out in the marketplace, the consumers are lapping it up in that way. It works in exactly the same way. And so that's the machine that I suppose young black artists who want to be great have to kind of navigate. And the way you navigate it is by presenting yourself as a human being. Just be great at what you do. Be your Stevie Wonder, be your George Michael, be incredible at what you do. Be a Brandy, be Coco from SWV, be amazing. Be Beyonce. And that's the difference. And that's what M&8 was always trying to do. We were just trying to be great at time. We couldn't sit there and call everyone racist and that everything was unjust. The world was the way it was, but we could control ourselves. And what we did, we just worked extra hard. And we didn't make the same mistakes a lot of other people would have. And we weren't trying to be the local urban guy in the community and trying to be more R&B or being more rugged or grindy than anyone else. We didn't care about that stuff. I wanted at 16 years old, I wanted a kid in Japan to have my record. That's all I wanted. I didn't even know what Japan looked like, the day-to-day in Japan looked like. When I was 16 years old, my whole drive to go and create a group like M&8 and be a huge star was, I thought, I had kind of like a near kind of, was this a near-death incident, but I had a confrontation with my mortality when I was about 16 years old. I was very, very sick, very, very sick. My parents were in Florida. I was 16 years old, hadn't left school. I was, I was at home. I was bedridden for quite a long time. And my brother at the time had been recording an album in the States, and it was amazing music. He was creating with a guy called Jay Logan in America, and it was my comfort. I was listening to that music constantly, and my brother always respected me. He would always call me and say, Kay, can you A&R this? Can you choose this? Can you choose what song to be the single? What do you think of this? Or he respected my. He knew me as a musician myself. 16 years old, and I remember thinking, gosh, I remember my dad coming and visiting me in hospital. I got sent to a hospital later on. My dad came and visited me, and he said to me, my dad was in tears. He was really worried about me. He thought I might, it could be something quite serious. They were testing for all kinds of terminal illnesses. Fortunately, it wasn't nothing. It was a scare. But I remember thinking that night, I was in this hospital ward, that, you know what? I'm this young musician, and I'm really talented. And I'm not talented in the way where I'm like the kid down the street. I'm talented in the way that I could be a superstar. I could be huge, be significant. And if I died right now, no one would know who I was. All they knew was I played in a couple of soccer teams at school, and spun on my head a few times during the breakdancing era. But if I get another shot, I'm going to go out into the world, and I'm going to do something huge. And at the end of it, if a kid as far as Japan has my record in their collection, my CD in their collection, that'll be a triumph for me. It means that I've lived. It means I was here. It means that I did something. I was here, and what my life wasn't insignificant. And what was quite funny to me, what was quite poignant, was I came across a fan recently from Japan, and they had our first single, I'll do it for you, in Japan, the Japanese release. And they posted it on Twitter or whatever. And I thought, wow, that was all I ever kind of wanted. And for me, to be able to do that, you have to go out and just transcend. You have to just be something bigger than the guy down the street. You had to just be who you were, And for me, when I was performing, I was Ralph Tresvant, I was Tevin Campbell, I was Michael Jackson, I was the guy from Shalimar, I was all the things all my whole journey, I was Boogaloo Shrimp from breakdance, I was all these people, I was everyone that I was Bob Marley, I was everyone I ever emulated, I was Frank Sinatra, I was all the people, as the osmosis, I was the result of all of that osmosis, and I wanted to do something great, and that's what I don't see much happening anymore, And those things are the representation. When people see that manifested, it becomes a manifestation. When people see an actor like Denzel Washington, they don't see a black guy. They see a great actor, And I wanted to be that. And I think that's what we need to do. I was talking to, my wife was talking about, my wife was a huge Michael Jackson fan in the 80s. And we were talking about young acts who are around now who kind of are emulating it, or people talk about it in the same ilk as Michael Jackson. Like Chris Brown and Usher and stuff like that. And when I look at people like Chris Brown can dance all day long. He's a fantastic dancer, He's got a nice voice as well. He's got a really good voice. He can perform all day long. He's like the Duracell bunny, He's got it for days. He's got like MC Hammer kind of thing. But it's a game of inches, right? It's a game of inches. And I think when you look at someone like Chris Brown, he resonates with that kind of. We've got a culture now that's very hip hop orientated. And we want something a little bit edgy, a little bit cool, a little bit igga, whatever you want to call it. And he's there, he's got it. But we don't have that young kid that you saw in the Say 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 video with Paul McCartney. We don't have that today. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
We don't have that magic. We don't have that magic anymore. We've got the guys who can dance really hard and sing and talk about sleeping with every girl from left, right, and center and taxied up to the hill. And that serves a particular market. We don't have anyone filling that void. And the people who have tried to do it over the years, if you look really, really hard, it's probably it's probably been more likely to be people like Lady Gaga or Justin Timberlake when he first came out. They tend to be the people that closely try to emulate it, even harking back to the days of like when you see certain things like this Fred Astaire stuff, the dance moves and the classiness, and looking back on history. Usher does it a little. Usher has a little bit of that himself as well. Usher has that little bit of sophistication, right? But that's when you touch everybody across cultures. You tend to, it's intertextual. You look at Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga is like Pat Benatar and Madonna and all these other things mixed into one. And it's like Bette Midler. She's got it all happening. When you watch it, you're getting this huge experience. It isn't just this one girl singing and dancing on the stage. When you saw Usher, you'd see a little bit of Michael Jackson. You'd see a little bit of you see a little bit of Michael Jackson. You'd see a little bit of James Brown. You'd see a little bit of something else. You see a little bit of Janet. You see a little bit of all the stuff that we ever grew up listening to. You'd even see a little bit of the best stuff of the New Jack Swing era. You saw Usher. He just had it, right? When he was young, he had it. He crystallized it, and he really, really had it. And he saw a little bit of Bobby Brown. Bobby Brown was like a god when we were growing up in the 80s. Usher had a little bit of Bobby Brown in here, something that's kind of missed. And Bobby Brown was harking back to artists that were from before as well. You see all of that. Artists today don't really do that. You know, the artists today are trying to be Usher or they're trying to be Chris Brown, but they're not going back enough. They're not looking at what they're looking back at what Sammy Davis Jr. was doing. They're not looking back at what, you know what I mean? They're not looking at people like Elvis or looking at people like James Brown. They're not looking that far. They're looking at what's happening now. They're trying to be the next August Alsina, you know? And it's cool. It's cool. It serves a particular marketplace, but you're not going to have superstars. You're not going to have it anymore. And the ones who are doing it really well are the white kids. The white kids, because they sit further away, they tend to have a broader base of resources and references. You know, they're not caught in that cookie kind of way of thinking.
Right. I definitely agree. I agree with you wholeheartedly. You know, each generation has their own, and just go back and do a little research now with MN8. I know Details now is into acting. He's been in a couple of films over here in America, Batman Begins, Star Wars. So what is G-Man and Kule-T up to nowadays?
So G-Man's in and around the industry. G-Man is I think he works a little bit more as a kind of in production and putting bands together. He spent a lot of time in the UK, and sorry, the US, working with a lot of bands in New York, young up and coming groups, doing the whole kind of like A&R thing and working with producers. I know he still works in and around. He still sings in church. He's like a family man right now, but you know he's poised and ready to go. He's like, hey, when you want to do this M&A thing, I'm ready. You know, when you want to come back and we do it, you know, I'm ready. Let's go. So he's all about it. T's still doing the same thing. When I met T was always like doing his own solo thing and singing backing vocals and doing session singing. And he loves what he does. So he's still out there doing his thing and making moves and he's not wasting his voice or his time. He's out there moving and shaking. Yeah, Details is working with Disney, and Details was always when we met Details was always looking to be an actor or a performer of some type. It's not really lost on me that he's doing those kind of things, and he's keeping active and busy. Again, he's poised to do M&8 again. You know, he's ready to go. They're all ready to go. Me, I'm out here. Funny thing with quarantine is I've been refocused on recording my own material again. Probably the M&8 album that I've kind of like been putting off forever and ever and ever. I've been recording solo music for the last probably 20 years, and I've never seen the light of day. It's been a labor of love. On my own terms, and I've been producing for other artists, beat making. That's how I get by here. But quarantine made me sit down and knuckle down and work on my own project.
Right.
As I said before, with the kind of music that's missing, I'm looking just to put some stuff out, roll some music out over the next few years, and just continue a bit of a career on my own. I kind of found myself sitting waiting for a day when we could do M&8 again. Quarantine being locked down forced me to not have that option firstly to tour with M&8 or consider any tours and actually look inwards and become really, really creative. So I'm going back and I'm working on new material again, and that's going to see the light of day. The kind of stuff I'm working on is very different. It's slightly different to things that I'm seeing now. It's the kind of music that I want to buy. I'm putting out the music that I want to buy. I'm not hearing it anymore. I recently was talking to my wife about somebody who was a bit of a mentor, someone I kind of looked up to, who recently passed away in the States. It was, you probably have spoken to this person before or know this person, but it's a guy called Daryl Diso from 911.
Basic Black.
Daryl Diso Adam, Basic Black, the lead singer of Basic Black. He was one of the guys that made me really want to sing when I was coming up, right? This guy, I'd have to tell you who Basic Black is. But he made me really want to sing. He was like Aaron Hall, but he had a different kind of take on things, It was like they dragged him straight out of church and put him in the studio, And I was speaking to this guy, speaking to him about 3-4 years ago. About 3-4 years ago about what he was up to and doing an electronic project, a little bit like CeeLo Green and Danger Mouse and stuff like that. And I was really excited because I loved his voice. I loved hearing this guy sing. I think he was actually after Basic Black. He joined 911. And I think he did some stuff with ARB, a Gene Griffin group back in the day. And he joined 911 and did that song Cutie. It was a precursor to Blackstreet. Amazing singer with a singer called Rob Stevenson. And I mean, the guy, I don't know if you go through his stuff, he's an amazing vocalist. Anyway, I learned just this week that he passed away in February,
Yeah,
and there was no fanfare. There was no fanfare. And there might have been some people in the States I knew about, but people who were huge, this guy was like a superstar in the UK. People that know that. People who really followed New Jack Swing and loved New Jack Swing, he was like, for us, he would be like a Casey or a JoJo or a, you know? And just knowing that he passed away and there was no noise and he didn't release that solo stuff he should have released. Well, he may have recorded it, no one knew about it. I think it's just a bit of a tragedy. And I think anyone who has anything creative to offer, I think it's kind of like a little bit of a prompt to get out and do something. So for me, it's a kick up the butt really just to, you know, start putting new music out, you know? For
yeah,
me, the last 20 years has been a journey. Like in terms of M&8, from M&8 till now, I mean, I'm a keen singer. I'm a keen student of singing, singer, you know? So I've always been developing since M&8 until now, my whole journey,
right.
production, writing. And there's a particular sound that I think is missing. I think I really liked what Usher did recently with LMA. Don't waste, don't waste my time. Don't waste my time. And I really like that sound where people incorporate a lot of stuff that happened in the 80s, the stuff that's happening now. There's a few artists that are doing it really, really well. I think LMA Boot Up did it really, really well. And I'm looking to kind of go back and create that kind of Jam and Lewis sound, but for now, you know? It's kind of the
Yeah,
album that Ralph Tresvant should have done or should be doing. And for me, it's ignoring everything else that's going on, all the trapped out stuff. I could produce that. I produce that kind of stuff for my kid all the time. I'm an avid producer. I sit there with my MPC and knock out beats all the time and sell them, you know? I could do that all day long. But there's like a
yeah,
magic and a beauty to something that's great. So I'm looking to create that album that maybe KG should have done, you know, and put it out. And it's somewhere between probably what someone like Neo's doing and something like what LMA's doing, and something that's going to be timeless, you know. Like when
mm,
I'm gone, people will say, "Oh, he actually went and did something," you know.
right, right. If you
And
definitely
if
get,
it,
yeah, if
yeah,
you
sorry,
definitely got the stuff, you know, get it out so
yeah,
that people can hear it. And then there is a website that I was a part of in the early 2000s called New Jack Swing Forever. We have a
uh-huh.
Facebook group, and there's a lot of people in that group that's from the UK. And they put me
Yeah,
on to a lot of UK acts. And I was like, oh,
yeah,
this is who that is. That's who that
yeah,
is. Why did it didn't blow in
uh-huh.
America? But it just shows how music is universal. And you know, you guys as M&8 have unfinished business. Your story still
Definitely.
has yet to be told. And I hope with my platform that it's done you guys justice to get your story, your truth out there.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that as well. That'd be fantastic. I mean, it needs to happen. We've literally been, for myself personally, I jokingly say that I'm in exile in Australia. The reason why I went to Australia was it was at the time when I was in M&A, I couldn't walk down the street, right? I was recognized everywhere I went. And I wanted to go and experience life. I wanted to do normal stuff, you know? And Australia was the most far-flung place I could go to, you know, and try to have a normal life, go and study and try and live. And I got involved in music over here. I signed a few acts to labels over here and worked with production companies and whatnot. But it hasn't been a big focus of mine, and I haven't had to do it for money. I've done it on my own terms. But the idea was to be exiled. But in doing that, I haven't had the chance to return and tell our story in the way that needs to be told. You know, the band M&8, they often speak. I mean, you know, T will do an interview in context with his own solo project. G's a little bit quiet at the moment, but he did a fantastic interview with the BBC about 5-6 years ago, which pretty much shed light on a lot of what was happening. Details, he's focused on his career at the moment, so he's not going to focus on M&A until something's actually really really happening. So for somebody who that was constantly in the studio throughout the whole process of recording M&A's album, and was the person who masterminded a lot of it and put it together and knew what was going on, and also the person stayed in touch with a lot of the executives way after the lawyers and the managers who continued working with me year after. There's so many angles on the story, and there's so much information I could share. And so one day, we'll get back and there'll be a book or there'll be a documentary. There's been a lot of interest in filmmakers to do something about just telling the story about what went on, and it's huge. I mean, it almost like it's almost like a Forrest Gump type story, because you understand at the time there was no social media, But a lot of the stuff that we were involved in, so if you think the names from Backstreet Boys to Spice Girls to Celine Dion to Michael Jackson to Janet Jackson, I mean, these people were superstars, and we were in amongst all of that. We're kind of like the biggest band that never was, in the
Mm-hmm.
UK, to come out of the UK, and no one really talks about it. And because of what we were, like in terms of our identity, it's kind of it's easy to dismiss. You know what I mean? They don't really often speak of us in the same light that they talk about E17 and Take That and Boyzone today, because it's easy to dismiss. In everyday life, people kind of can move on. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's important that people like you are doing what you're doing and talking about these things. And and I think a lot of fans who are there are millions of fans around the world who've just been distracted with their lives. They're busy with their lives. They're older people working. They're not sitting there on social media. They probably don't even use certain platforms because of their age group and demographic those platforms resonate with. So those people are really oblivious to what's happening with M&A, and it's even inconsequential to them because they're busy with their lives. So it's a matter of if this kind of content's important because when they hear it, they'll be very interested in these stories. They'll be very
Right.
interested in sort of they'll connect on that level.
Right.
And I think
Definitely
that's
that.
where yeah. It's fantastic. It's really good what you're doing. Brilliant.
Yeah, I appreciate that wholeheartedly. Do you have any shout outs you want to give before we conclude this interview?
Look, I just want to give a shout out to D-Man, Details, Kule-T, and that's mainly it for now. But we'll have some news for you guys once we got on top of this whole COVID thing, and then when they start touring again, there'll be a next chapter to all of this, and there'll also be some new music coming out shortly. There'll be some new music coming out, some really mind blowing stuff.
Okay. And is there anywhere on social media where people can follow to stay updated with M&8 news or anything like that?
Sure, we've got M&8 Facebook. I think for myself, I've been maintaining all of that over the years. So I've been sitting in exile and far away, and so you can hit me up on official KG M&8 on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So I'm going to be putting out new information on there soon, but that's the best place you can get in touch.
All right, people. And also you can catch this episode along with past episodes of Beyond the Album Cover on Anchor, Breaker, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, wherever you get your streaming podcasts. Go to anchor.fm/Beyond the Album Cover, all one word. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, KG from UK R&B pop group M&8 on Beyond the Album Cover. KG, thank you once again for doing this interview with me.
Thank you, Joe. It's been a pleasure.